Birds fly through the sky as we are shown a large and victorious empire called Ares. A crowd moves past a giant statue, and guards patrolling nearby say that the empire is very peaceful. The mustachioed guard agrees but remarks that one can never be sure when the rebels might cause trouble. These rebels were from small kingdoms that could spark a rebellion. The other guard says maybe they've realized rebellion is futile and have given up. The mustachioed guard remarks that it's been very quiet, wondering if perhaps the knights have already handled the problem, and he hopes the peace continues. In another location, a man is saying they should kill the emperor and overthrow the entire empire, claiming it's the only way to reclaim the kingdom. The people around him exchange glances, suggesting someone might be needed for the plan. That's when we're introduced to our protagonist, Count Logan MacLean. The strategist remarks that the Book of Visions should never be taken from Logan. Logan acknowledges he's aware of this and leaves the room where he was planning a strategy against the Heirs Empire. As Logan leaves, a young boy appears beside him, calling Logan a true patriot. The protagonist asks what he's talking about. The boy mentions the Book of Visions, explaining that many comrades have been sacrificed over a long time to protect it, and taking responsibility for the book has become a priority for the Imperial forces. But still, Logan is willing to take the risk and bear the responsibility for the mission. With a dark expression, the protagonist retorts that the boy spoke as if Logan had volunteered for this. The young man points out that Logan is fluent in the ancient language, but accepting this burden and enduring it silently wasn't just a sign of patriotism. Logan asks him to stop, saying that thinking otherwise insults his comrades. He emphasizes that this isn't about patriotism, it's about revenge. Flashing back to Logan's childhood, we see him defeated by his younger brother Ronian. Voices whisper that Ronian started wielding a sword at age 3, calling him a genius. In contrast, Logan went through 10 years of knight training. It seemed the future of the MacLean family was uncertain with a fool like Logan as the firstborn. Moving forward in time, we see Logan's father slamming a table, accusing Logan of poisoning his own brother with a paralyzing toxin. He orders Logan to leave, saying that hurting his brother out of envy is unforgivable and declaring that Logan is no longer his son. Logan accepts this judgment, leaves his family, and becomes a mercenary. After 10 years of wandering, he realized how pathetic he had been, but by then, it was too late. Gossiping women discuss a public execution scheduled in the square, and the condemned is Ronian MacLean, who fought on the front lines against the Empire. Logan, thinking to himself, still needed to say something to his brother, asking him to please keep living. At the square, we see a blood-stained guillotine and our hero looking terrified. A soldier on stage yells that this is the last time any fool opposes the Empire. Logan swears vengeance against the Empire that killed his entire family. Ultimately, he couldn't ask his brother for forgiveness. At the Empire's castle, guards chase the protagonist, saying he's the one with the Book of Visions. As he flees, Logan finds himself in a dead-end alley and is soon surrounded by guards. With no chance to escape, his only option is to fight. One guard rushes at him, and Logan barely manages to defend against the strike, finding an opening to counterattack. He disarms his opponent and quickly slashes his neck. Another guard appears, cursing at Logan, but Logan quickly strikes, stabbing him in the chin. Then a man sneaks up behind Logan, ready to deliver a deadly blow. Yet again, Logan outmaneuvers him, killing the guard. Suddenly, several guards show up, intent on killing Logan, demanding he return the stolen book. In his dark thoughts, Logan wonders if this is the end. With a faint smile, he decides that if it's come to this, he will take everyone down with him. He crushes a kind of stone in his hand, causing a massive explosion that lights up the entire castle. In profound void, Logan is lost in his thoughts, reflecting on a life filled with regrets, lived solely in pursuit of revenge. Our hero says that the only good thing was having gotten back at those Imperial scoundrels. However, even in death, he feels he can't escape his regrets, adding that he should have asked for his brother's forgiveness, and that even in the afterlife, he hopes to find his family again and ask for their forgiveness. Logan wakes up in bed with his head bandaged, complaining about a severe headache, but questioning how he could feel pain if he was dead. Someone appears beside him, calling him young master, and asks if everything's okay. The protagonist sees a very familiar face and says the person's name, Rick. Rick confirms that it's him and introduces himself as a loyal servant of Calm, then asks if Logan is feeling alright. In his thoughts, the protagonist notes that Rick died 30 years ago, and out loud he asks Rick how he is alive. The servant looks shocked and rushes out, instructing the maid to call a doctor, mentioning that our hero must have taken a severe blow to the head. Logan feels confused about what's happening, then looks out the window and sees soldiers training. Noticing the family crest everywhere, he wonders if this is just a dream. Someone enters the room, calling the protagonist's brother, asking if Logan is okay. At this moment, our hero realizes that the voice belongs to Ronian. The boy seems nervous in front of the protagonist, and Logan recalls this moment. It was the day he had his first official duel with Ronian, where he was mercilessly defeated. Ronian had visited him when he was ill, but Logan acted out of sheer envy, calling his brother a bastard and telling him never to mention the incident again. After all the mistreatment and insults Logan inflicted on him, Ronian, who had always looked up to his older brother, never sought him out again. Remembering all this, Logan gets a severe headache and his brother, startled, asks if everything is alright. Rick tells Ronian that the young master still needs rest to recover and suggests he leave. But Logan stops him, saying there's no problem if Ronian stays. His brother, with a gentle expression, cautiously looks at the protagonist. The servant seems confused about the situation. Ronian apologizes to Logan, saying he should be more careful, but our hero interrupts, saying there's no need to apologize and that his brother did nothing wrong. Just as he's about to say something, he remembers that even someone as kind as Ronian fought on the front lines against the Empire and died tragically. Without hesitation, Logan grabs his brother's shoulders, apologizes, and starts crying, expressing deep regret. As he hugs him, Ronian asks why he's crying. Without any response, Ronian continues hugging our hero. A little later, Ronian says he'll visit again soon, and Logan warmly replies, "See you later." Looking out the window, our hero says that if all this isn't a dream and he's really gone back in time, he'll do things differently so they don't turn out like before. Suddenly, his servant shouts, calling the young master. When Logan looks back, he sees a maid apologizing and he asks why she's sorry. Rick explains that the maid, Maria, interrupted the master's rest and that he had forgotten to tell her to be careful. Rick adds that Maria had entered the wrong room by mistake. In his thoughts, Logan remembers that during his time, he was a troublemaker and caused a lot of issues for the servants. Logan tells Rick that Maria did nothing wrong and asks him to bring paper and a pen. The two servants seem surprised, wondering if Logan wants to do something to Maria. Quickly, Logan says to just bring paper and a pen. His servant brings the items and places them on the table. The protagonist thanks him and asks Rick to ensure nobody enters the room. The servant seems taken aback because Logan thanked him, asking if the young master is okay or if he's experiencing a headache. Without delay, the protagonist says he's fine and tells Rick to leave. Our hero feels frustrated, overhearing Rick mention that Logan must be okay because he yelled at him and told Maria to go back to work. Sitting at the table, Logan thinks he needs to be patient because all these events are the result of his own actions. Returning to the main topic, Logan says the most important thing now is to document everything that will happen in the future. The war that will occur in 10 years, a disaster that will not only bring down his family, but the entire nation. Preventing all of this is his goal, but before that, the feudal war will happen in 1 year. They started so suddenly and ended up partially destroying the family. Logan says he needs to prevent that first, but before anything else. In another location, someone informs the family patriarch that the young master is there to see him, asking if it's Logan. We see the protagonist walking down the corridor, causing quite a stir among the servants just by being there. Maids slip away quietly, but one carrying a mountain of bed sheets drops them, and they fall right in front of the young master. She gets frightened, wondering what she's going to do now, thinking she's doomed. A gentle hand reaches out and asks if she's okay. She says yes, but gets even more scared when she sees Logan's face. The protagonist assures her that it's not a big deal, but the maid throws herself to the ground, saying she's committed a grave sin and begs for forgiveness. Our hero doesn't understand what's happening, but in his mind, he thinks it's strange for someone to change so drastically overnight. He assumes the servants need time to adapt, and with time, he'll show them he's changed a lot. Smiling, he looks in the mirror and says it's not that strange. Back to the moment when the servant informs the family patriarch that Logan is there, the protagonist, worried, looks at the door, remembering the day his father told him he didn't consider him his son anymore. When he was expelled, he thought his father had given up on him completely, and his heart had turned cold. Even after the duel, his father didn't visit him. Logan realizes how foolish he was to think that of his father and wonders how desolate a father must feel to abandon his own son. When the door opens, light reflects on the protagonist as he looks at his father. The patriarch looks out the window, where the light is so bright, then turns to speak with Logan. The protagonist, with a face that looks like he's about to cry, thinks he's truly sorry and apologizes in his mind. Logan's father remarks that the protagonist is better than he thought and asks what he wants. Our hero is surprised because his father is still cold, but Logan understands that for him, 20 years have passed, while the patriarch sees his son's face every day. He finally says he wants to do isolated training on the McLean family lands. In Logan's mind, to win the regional war, it's necessary to strengthen the forces throughout the entire territory, strengthen the knight and soldier ranks, improve weapons, and use various other methods. But to do all this, Logan needs money. Unfortunately, the McLeans are known as the beggar family in the kingdom. They don't have any money. But there is one way to make a lot of money, the incident that will happen in 3 months. With that single event, Logan could make a year's worth of the family's budget in one go. But to do this, he needs to perfect his martial skills. The patriarch asks if Logan wants to run away because he lost to his brother. The protagonist replies that it's not that, but rather that he realizes he's been inadequate all this time. So even if it's late, he's trying to make up for it. The patriarch says it's not just a lack of effort and wonders if Logan has come to terms with reality. Our hero admits that he also sees his behavior as problematic. Without remorse, the patriarch says he's tired and has heard Logan say this many times, ordering him to leave. But our hero doesn't give up so easily and says that instead of acknowledging his own faults, he took out his anger on others. He says he was completely foolish and immature and that through this training, he wants to work on his maturity. He asks his father again for permission to do this. The patriarch says it's not a weak excuse this time and asks how long Logan plans to train. Logan replies that 3 months should be enough. His father asks if Logan thinks he can catch up to Ronin in such a short time. Logan, unfazed, explains that he's not doing it to defeat Ronin, and by choosing a shorter time, he simply wants to do his best. The patriarch says it seems like the protagonist has changed a bit, so he's going to allow him to train on the family lands. Logan thanks him and heads toward the door, but his father calls him back, reminding him that it's still spring and that the family's land will be very cold at night, so he should be careful to stay warm. With a genuine smile, the protagonist leaves the room. Days later, the protagonist is in the middle of a forest. Logan notes that only members of the McLean family are allowed into this area, and it's vast, perfect for solitary training. Our hero says no one can see his training methods just yet, then pulls out a book, calling it The Secrets of the Divine Swords. He says that in his past life, he memorized and burned the book to keep it out of imperial hands. The book originally had a golden falcon in the center and contained secrets passed down by heroes from ancient times, those who killed the dragon that ruled the world. It was written in secret military codes so that no one could decipher it. Logan says that if the Book of Visions is true, after mastering it completely, even the Empire's Grandmasters or Archmages wouldn't be so intimidating. Before returning, it was too late for Logan's age and he wasn't very talented, but now he has a new chance. The protagonist begins to prepare by using techniques from the foundation of the Divine Sword to focus his energy toward his heart and create a core. Doing this with average talent would be a daunting task, and his past self would have crumbled at this stage. However, after returning to the past, Logan's body has strengthened in every aspect, and 3 days and 3 nights of hard work would be enough too. But before he knew it, his core was already formed. As his core is being created, a tremendously dense energy explodes and his body is absorbing it all. To test his new power, Logan pulls a sword from his backpack and strikes with force and precision, delivering a powerful blow. Our hero says the technique is quite good. Everything is changed in a way that allows him to wield his sword properly, even though he has no idea how the core formed in less than 10 seconds. At this rate, he'll be much stronger in less than 3 months. Logan decides to continue his training morning, afternoon, and night. A month later, we see the protagonist on his last day of training. Of the 10 sword techniques in the Book of Visions, he managed to learn only one skill, the time-space slash, a technique that cuts through time and space. Preparing to launch the attack, the protagonist says he only managed to learn this technique because he has a 1-star core. Executing the technique with skill, Logan is determined to succeed at all costs. He unleashes his attack on a tree, his face lighting up with happiness as he watches the tree shatter. The protagonist laughs, saying this power is beyond his comprehension. This wasn't a technique that a beginner could execute. Even though he's exhausted after using it, it would still be a good trump card. Having achieved his training goals, he can now proudly report the results to his father. Back at the castle, a guard tells Logan that he can't see the patriarch, and the protagonist asks why, wondering if his father is unwell. The guard explains that blood relatives aren't allowed to see the patriarch without prior notice, asking if the young master had forgotten this rule. Rick suggests they leave, saying it's a rule of the royal family. However, our hero mentions that 3 months ago, he had met him without any issues, and with a sarcastic smile, the guard replies that the guard in charge must not have done his job correctly. In his mind, the protagonist wonders why this never happened in his past life. Logan hears some noises inside the castle and mentions that his new technique has improved his hearing. The knights inside the castle say the protagonist is a coward who ran away after losing to his younger brother. Logan realizes his reputation has hit rock bottom since he left to train, so much so that even the knights see him as a joke. The guard tells him to come back next time after giving proper notice. Our hero finds this annoying, planning to change his reputation slowly, and asks for the guard's name. Without understanding why he wants to know, the guard responds that his name is Dominant. Logan then starts to point out what the guard did prevented him from seeing his father with a practically defunct rule and humiliated him with an insolent attitude. Dominant wonders what the protagonist is doing, as it seems like he's asserting authority, and Logan continues by saying that to pay for his unjust humiliation, he suddenly throws his glove in the face of the extra, declaring that he challenges him. The knights don't understand what's happening, much less Dominant, who's being called into a duel. The protagonist sarcastically asks why the little guard isn't responding and adds if he's scared. Logan continues by asking if the guard will cower before a coward who's been humiliated. Filled with rage, Dominant accepts the duel. In the battle arena, all the knights wonder if Logan has lost his mind since the protagonist stands no chance of winning. They say that our hero was beaten up by Ronin and hid for 3 months to avoid his brother. They start placing bets to see how long Logan will last in the duel. The protagonist, slightly irritated, notices that no one expects him to win. A knight remarks that the young master looks too relaxed and asks him to be careful not to get hurt. In his mind, Logan thinks that Dominant had the audacity to insult him, but doesn't have the courage to say anything to a family member in front of other knights. In the end, he's just a coward. Rick, watching from a distance, says that his master really is going to fight against the knight. Someone arrives to announce the duel between the two, saying the battle will start now. For safety reasons, they'll use wooden swords. The knight nods at Logan to continue the introduction, thinking that the protagonist is being very stubborn and that to reduce the risk, they decided to use wooden swords. But for a power-based knight, killing someone with a wooden sword isn't that difficult. Even so, he goes along with it because whatever happens isn't his responsibility. And then the duel begins. The two take their positions and Dominant quickly uses his mana core. All the guards are shocked because the knight really doesn't want to hold back, and using this against a human could be deadly. Others wonder if using this isn't considered cheating. With a calm demeanor, Logan notices that everyone feels intimidated by an overpowered mana core, adding that the energy from the core is leaking and that Dominant can't even control it. To make Dominant impatient, the protagonist asks if he's feeling agitated, as if something's bothering him. Then the knight prepares to attack with full force and charges toward the protagonist, with everyone shouting at Dominant and take it easy. The knight says he'll end it with his secret technique. Without moving a muscle, the protagonist just watches everything happen, effortlessly dodges and counters, knocking Dominant to the ground without any resistance. Logan says that Dominant calls himself a knight, but he lost in such a pathetic way. Everyone watching is impressed, realizing the protagonist is also a core user. In a badass pose, our hero calls the referee and says he wants to give Dominant another chance. The referee nods and kneels to ask if the knight is okay. Dominant doesn't understand what's happening, wondering if he's weaker than young boy. In a cowardly attempt, he tries to attack the protagonist, but Logan, with a look of indifference, delivers a powerful strike, sending the knight flying. Our hero sees that Dominant is down again, commenting that he even gave him another chance, then adding that the knight should consider retirement. When Dominant is about to admit defeat, Logan strikes again, and in his mind he says he's shown a lot of mercy to a vassal who tried to defy his superior, so it's time for his punishment. Without any remorse, the protagonist starts beating Dominant, and the latter begs Logan to stop, with others saying this is too cruel. The knights ask if this is the same young master they knew, wondering how he could change so much in just 3 months. His strength had awakened and his skill had also improved. It was as if he had been a swordsman for decades. After the punishment, the referee announces the winner is Logan McLean. In the Patriarch's room, his father says that everything the protagonist has done is quite impressive, asking what happened during a training that caused such a change. Logan says he just abandoned his ambition and left everything behind, and while training with that mentality, he felt the core forming within him. In his mind, he acknowledges it might sound like a lie, but in his past life, when he abandoned everything to avenge his family, he eventually obtained his core, and that happened when he was 40 years old. His father says he understands what Logan is talking about and agrees that the protagonist has indeed changed. What was the first thing he did to challenge a knight? Logan, without fear, says the soldier deserved it. He asked his father if he knew about the stories the knights were spreading. The Patriarch says he knew but asked again if it was necessary to go that far. Without any courtesy, Logan says it was necessary. His father is surprised by his son's response. The protagonist explains that the man was trying to tarnish the Patriarch's image and making jokes about him. If left unchecked, it would be poisonous to the family's discipline. He adds that hierarchy is what keeps an organization functioning. When hierarchy is undermined, the whole organization crumbles. In his mind, our hero recalls living as a mercenary for 10 years and realizes that when it comes to armed men, you need to take control by defeating them in one blow. The events of today serve as a lesson for the other knights. The Patriarch says that Dominant is definitely at fault as he forgot his place and tried to trick Logan, but it was still very risky, so he asks the protagonist to contain himself for now. Our hero is surprised that the Patriarch forgave him so easily. He asks what's wrong and if his father wants to punish him. The Patriarch clarifies that it doesn't mean Logan was right and warns him not to deceive himself. He must never do this without his father's permission, and that he hasn't even received his official rank yet. Logan says he'll remember that. His father adds that his fiancée is coming to visit him. Surprised, Logan comments that she's finally coming, his cash cow. Her name is Princess Rena. We then see the princess arriving at the castle, and everyone is captivated by her beauty. A guard remarks that the young master is very lucky. Rena introduces herself to the Patriarch, who comments that the princess has become a lady. Rick, also waiting for Rena, notes that the last time he saw the princess, she was quite young, but now she's become unbelievably beautiful. But when he looks at the protagonist, he notices that Logan isn't excited. Even though she's his fiancée, he should be the happiest one here. The princess pulls out a letter entrusted to her by the count, then begins to read. 30 minutes later, the guards complain that the letter is too long. In the closing words, Rena announces that due to unavoidable circumstances, they are requesting to break off the arranged engagement set up by the Patriarch. A hush falls over the area. Our hero deduces that the real message behind this is that the Count doesn't want his daughter to marry a loser. With a grim aura, the Patriarch states that breaking the engagement without a proper reason is housebold's trying to humiliate the McLeans. Rena clarifies that this is not the case and explains that she came personally to avoid any misunderstandings. She says she has childhood memories of visiting the McLeans. memories she created with young Master Logan in this beautiful place. Those precious times will always remain in her mind. However, she's bound to her family and must follow the instructions given to her, which is why she came to apologize. The maid saying her heart is more beautiful than her face. Logan's expression seems different from everyone else's, while the woman next to the patriarch asks Miss Rina why she's breaking the engagement and what these unavoidable circumstances are. Mary and Kairos, the protagonist's stepmother and Ronian's biological mother, always considered Logan a rival due to the succession to the throne. He thought she'd stay quiet, but family honor is a different matter. Rina apologizes, saying she doesn't know the reason herself. The woman presses, asking if she really has no idea about her own marriage. The princess replies that she's just someone set to marry into another family, and that her father doesn't discuss important family matters with her. Logan's stepmother points out that the princess has come to announce she's breaking the engagement without any valid reason. She asks if they can understand it that way. Rina adds that in compensation, House Wolves will pay 3 million gold, which startles the financial manager because it's such a large amount. Logan is thrilled because now he just needs to get his hands on that money. The patriarch of the family shouts, asking how dare they, his overwhelming pressure forcing everyone to the ground. Rina's knight tells her to step back. The knight from House Wolves politely asks the patriarch to calm down and continue the discussion. The patriarch remarks that this knight has a high rank like himself, which is impressive for his age. The patriarch then says that he supposes injuring the rising star from House Wolves would be a fair trade for the dishonor inflicted on House McLean. The knight responds that their patriarch said that Logan's father is a man of great honor, and also mentioned that the patriarch wouldn't pursue the young princess. Rina adds that she doesn't want to buy honor with money and asks him to accept this as a gesture of solidarity between the two families. In his mind, the patriarch thinks that if he insists, he'll become a man without honor, which is exactly what Chiron Wolves wants. So Logan's father says that visitors are visitors and House McLean does not harass its guests, but he can't accept this unilateral offer from the Wolves. In exchange for breaking the engagement, he wants Rina to apologize to his son, and he refuses any other type of compensation. The guards are impressed by the patriarch's nobility. Logan calls his father, explaining that as someone involved in the marriage, he has a request, asking him to please listen. In his mind, our hero knows he has to get this money at all costs. Without any courtesy, the protagonist continues, saying that half of the house's funding comes from his stepmother's family, and when that connection is severed, everyone will go bankrupt. Talking about honor? That's foolish. He must get those 3 million no matter what. Returning to the protagonist's words, Logan says he wants to accept the Wolves' apology terms. His father is outraged, asking if his son wants him to go back on his word. Our hero falters under the pressure but explains that money is more important than his life. His father declares that House McLean isn't so poor that it would abandon honor for money. Taking a deep breath, Logan responds to his father's face that they are extremely poor. He adds that the house owes more than 3 million to the bank, and the annual interest is over 150,000 gold. Without his stepmother's support, they would be bankrupt at this very moment. He continues, saying they are the poorest family in the kingdom. Everyone is shocked by the protagonist's words. Logan claims that the reason to accept the 3 million gold has nothing to do with honor. The patriarch then asks if the reason for accepting is honor. Logan says that House Wolves has a higher standing than theirs, and he fears rumors might spread that House McLean accepted the breakup with just an apology. Rita responds that House Wolves isn't irrational and has the utmost respect for House McLean's honor. Logan points out that Rina came to break the engagement without reason and now talks about rationality. Doesn't she find that ridiculous? In the protagonist's previous life, he thought Rina was genuinely sad about the separation. But this is what happened. The princess had called Logan to her room, saying that even if they ended things today, she still wanted to create one last memory with him. In his past life, Logan had been expelled from the family, and since he had lost everything, running away with the woman he loved seemed like the best option. So the protagonist suggested to Rina that they run away together. But he quickly got scared when Rina threw a knife at him. Luckily, he managed to defend himself with his sword. We see the princess's true colors when she scornfully remarks that the young master really thought he was a good match for her. He should know his place and disappear. She adds that he lost to a child, but because of that, things became easier. Not knowing what's going on, Logan asks what's happening as it's all so sudden. Everything became clear when Rina screamed. Her guard entered and asked what happened to his lady, and she claimed that out of nowhere, the young master became aggressive. Logan realized that Rina had set him up. At the time, he tried to explain, but his reputation was terrible, and his family didn't believe him. His family had to pay a hefty sum as compensation. Because of her, the protagonist says he never trusted another woman again, and he's sure she's planning something this time, but too bad. Logan vows that this time she won't get away with it. At first, our hero thought about changing his reputation within the family, believing that if they saw him slowly changing, the whole family would change as well. But his fight with Dominant made him realize that the soldiers turned a blind eye even when someone disrespected him, and many rumors spread while he was absent. Logan wanted to transform the family by gaining recognition, but with only 9 months left until the regional war, his reputation no longer mattered. Out loud, he tells the princess that he will accept the 3 million gold. Rina is startled and his father reprimands Logan, asking how he dares defy his wishes. The protagonist says he can't be satisfied with hollow apologies. If honor can be compensated with mere words that just disappear into the air, then its value is as light as those words. The princess says that the wolves are willing to follow the patriarch's wishes and asks what Logan's father's decision is. Our hero remarks that while Rina says that she only wants to save her father's face, she probably fears having to pay 3 million. The patriarch, as a representative of House McLean, is satisfied with an apology but leaves it to his son Logan to decide if the apology is sincere. The stepmother becomes apprehensive, as do all those present. His father tells the protagonist to think carefully, because if he accepts money for dishonor, he'll be opening a door for future negotiations of his honor. So our hero states that as one of the people involved in the marriage breakup, he accepts the wolves' compensation. His stepmother is impressed, while Rina is at a loss. His father remarks that he thought Logan had changed for the better, but it seems he's changed for the worse. He adds that maybe it's his fault for not teaching Logan the true value of honor. In his mind, Logan, though sad, thinks he's doing this for his family. Later, we see the protagonist saying he finally secured the gold. 3 million is a lot, but he shouldn't get too excited as he needs to put that money in the bank. Someone knocks on the door and the protagonist assumes it's Rick, inviting them to enter. The person who walks in is Dwayne, the most trusted financial manager of the patriarch, but Logan isn't naive and can tell this gentle smile isn't for him. In Dwayne's thoughts, he considers this the biggest challenge of his life. As the financial manager, he's been managing the entire estate with his shrinking budget. Guards and butlers complain about the lack of supplies and the need to replace soldiers' weapons. Dwayne has had to compensate for the lack of funds by asking the patriarch's relatives for help. He wonders if he's a financial manager or the chief of beggars, adding that if it weren't his hometown, he would quit long ago. But now he has the opportunity to be comfortable for a few years, and his opponent is just an unsuspecting young man. He says he's sorry, but he'll have to split the 3 million. Back in reality, Dwayne says he just came to say hello and tells Logan he's made a great impression on him. The way the protagonist stood his ground without flinching, his attitude, and the aura he exudes, all quite impressive and truly befitting a McLean heir. Back in Dwayne's thoughts, he wonders how Logan feels about his compliment. Before, Logan only messed up, so this might be the first time he receives praise. Our hero asks what Dwayne is doing here, then adds that in these difficult times, 3 million is like a downpour during a drought. The intelligence shown by the protagonist has allowed the family to breathe a sigh of relief. Without any emotion, Logan asks why the family would be relieved. After all, the money is his. Dwayne had anticipated this, but the kid actually thinks he's going to use it all for himself. He asks Logan to be patient, reminding him that he's been the McLean's financial manager for 20 years. He shows Dwayne constantly begging Viscount Kairos for money, mentioning that self-humiliation has become quite normal. Logan asks if the family situation is that bad. Taking advantage of the moment, Dwayne explains that they owe 3 million to Cooper Bank with an annual interest rate of. The protagonist completes the sentence, saying it's 150,000. He adds that it's harvest time, which should cover the interest. Dwayne explains that running a barony generally costs a lot of money, and that they always have a tight budget, asking if our hero could help a little. Straightforwardly, Logan refuses and Dwayne doesn't understand because he thought the protagonist opposed the patriarch for the barony's sake. Logan says he'll use the money for the family's sake and won't spend it on immediate expenses. With a serious look, he explains that you must consider the future. Dwayne, still underestimating the protagonist's capabilities, just asks him to hand over the money quickly. Logan asks what would change if he used that money to cover the family's debts. Dwayne replies that they have a larger budget and the management of the estate would be easier for a few years, giving them some breathing room. Our hero asks what they'll do after that, suggesting they'll likely end up in debt again without any unique products. He states it's a vicious cycle, and he's trying to break it by using the money for his plan. Dwayne wonders if this is the same slacker he used to know, as he thought the protagonist was just a kid who didn't care about family matters. Logan says he has a request, and if Dwayne can do this for him, he'll help cover some of the family's expenses. Dwayne seems intrigued and asks what the request is. Logan says he needs him to gather some mercenaries. A little later, we see the protagonist in armor, and Rick asks if Logan is really leaving. He confirms, and his butler asks where he's going. Logan replies that he's going to make money. Rick mentions that he already has plenty of money, but the protagonist says he needs much more. The butler insists that he's sure the patriarch won't let Logan leave, pointing out that the atmosphere in the castle is quite tense. Logan dismisses Rick's words, saying he knows all this and plans to leave secretly. In his mind, Logan notes that he can't change his reputation right now, so he'll build power from outside. Fortunately, the protagonist is familiar with what's happening outside the castle, as he had experienced this when he was expelled from his family and traveled around the kingdom. Rick shouts, asking what the protagonist is thinking. Running away at his age, Logan comments that he's quite persistent, acting like a child, his butler lies down on the floor, saying that if the protagonist leaves, he can trample on him. Our hero jokingly pretends to step on him, adding that Rick shouldn't worry because he'll leave a note for his father, ensuring no one will blame him. Rick asks what Logan will write, and Logan gives a sinister smile. Later, in the patriarch's office, his father reads the letter's content. The protagonist wrote that he's sad about the broken engagement and left the castle to clear his head, signed Logan. In his mind, Rick hopes the protagonist returns soon. A while later, our hero gets lost in thought and explains his family's history. He mentions that 200 years ago, the McLean family wasn't in the position it is now. The vast and extensive counties stretched from the neighboring county of Tessern to the counties of Sylvan and Perina, across the Bifrost Plains, where he was revered as the ruler and lord of southeastern Grandia. But thanks to the current patriarch and the useless work of the previous 3 generations, his ancestors saw their title downgraded, their territory reduced to nearly nothing, and their once grand storage of grains, known as the McLean Plains, given to the strongest vassal. The fertile land was divided among several vassals. The place where the McLean family ended up was the southern mountains. There were no suitable regional products, and copper mines were non-existent. And even if they win the regional war, they'd still have to rely on Kairos to break the vicious debt cycle, which requires a lot of money, much more than 3 million. However, there's someone who could give Logan that money, the largest city in the kingdom, Kale. In the middle of the city, the protagonist walks around seeing various people selling products. Our hero pulls out a letter from his pocket and mentions that the person he's looking for is Philip Claude, the Gold Lover. The strongest nation on the continent, the Heirs Empire is a centralist nation based on a merit system. As long as you have talent, regardless of gender or age, you can succeed. It's a nation where you can enjoy power and wealth, and this right is even extended to foreigners who aren't citizens of the empire. One example is Philip Claude from the Kingdom of Grandia. This guy is one of the wealthiest merchants who drive the empire's economy and is the largest war merchant on the continent. He's often called a traitor to the Kingdom of Grandia, but in reality, even though he's known as the Gold Lover, he would still support his homeland against all odds and use his own money and power to create the miracle of Grandia's sovereign rule. And this person is really lying on the ground looking like a beggar. He's complaining about some people who tricked him, wondering how he could survive from here on out. Logan explains that his business failed because some people deceived him, and witnessing it firsthand is pretty terrible. Without wasting time, our hero approaches the man, asking if he's Philip Claude. He confirms that's him, then asks who the protagonist is. Philip begins to notice various things about Logan, his red hair and eyes, and his intense gaze. Our hero says he's relieved it's him, and asks if they could talk. Suspicious, Philip wonders who this man is, how he knows his name, and whether he knows him. At this moment, Philip senses a strong emotion in Logan's eyes. An emotion the businessman has seen many times before: greed. Once again, Philip observes the protagonist's details, noticing his ancient armor, and randomly assumes Logan is a mercenary thug. As the protagonist is about to introduce himself, the man loses his cool, shouting that it's not payday yet, that the money from the commercial property sale is coming in 3 days, so come back then. Our hero tries to say something, but Philip shouts again, saying he hasn't received the payment yet. After this brief outburst, the man looks exhausted, and the protagonist just watches with disdain. Logan explains that he's not there to collect any money, but rather to invest. Philip is taken aback, saying the protagonist doesn't want to collect money, implying that he's crazy. Who'd want to invest in a failure like him? But then he thinks, what if our hero is serious? He asks how much Logan intends to invest. The protagonist asks how much he needs and says he'll provide enough to cover his debts and make a profit. Philip notices that Logan's armor is filthy, suggesting he came from far away. But when he spots the crest of House McLean, the protagonist continues asking how much he needs and promises to match it. Suddenly, Philip points his finger at our hero, saying that if he wanted to trick him, he should have prepared properly, just like the others who tricked him. He strongly asserts that the protagonist isn't an investor because that crest is from House McLean, a family of beggars who live off their relatives. But Logan wants to invest even though he doesn't have the money to cover his own debts, and if our hero is caught impersonating a noble, he'll be executed immediately. He adds that Logan chose the wrong person to deceive because he's completely broke. The protagonist comments that even at rock bottom, Philip still has sharp judgment. Philip goes back to lamenting that he doesn't have enough money to eat or even die. To resolve the situation, Logan uses his skill, and Philip realizes that a young genius like him wouldn't try to deceive him. His attitude quickly changes, apologizing for being insensitive, then asks what business Logan wants to discuss. Our hero, without any emotion, says he wants to hire Philip permanently, and that paying his debts would be just a bonus. The man points out that House McLean doesn't have enough money for that, right? The protagonist opens his bag and reveals many gold coins, and in Philip's eyes, Logan looks like an angel. Moments later, we see Philip signing the contract with his blood. The witch explains that the consequences of harming his master are intense pain, as if his soul is splitting, and if he doesn't like it, he just needs to awaken his core or hire a level 4 mage, which would cost hundreds of times more than what the protagonist has. Philip realizes that the protagonist bought an expensive contract just to make him his eternal slave. Our hero explains that in a first meeting, it's impossible to establish mutual trust, and once they gain more confidence, they'll get rid of the contract. The protagonist extends his hand, asking if they can work well together from now on. Philip admits this whole arrangement is chaotic, lacking details or conditions, but he has no choice but to trust Logan now. He asks what he should do now. The protagonist says the first thing he wants to do is buy monster meat. Philip is so shocked that his speech and thought bubbles flip. In his mind, Logan understands his surprise since monster blood and meat contain poison, and burning them is common practice. But in a few years, the situation will change because citizens discover a way to neutralize the poison with common ingredients. And when people started eating this meat, they noticed its effect. The meat from the Kalak monster worked like Viagra. People who had damaged or visibly infertile private parts found that after eating the meat, they were functioning again, and a year after the Magic Tower validated this as a powerful Viagra, Kalak became impossible to find across the continent. A species vanished simply because it was good for virility. With this knowledge, Logan could turn his 3 million into more than 100 million in just a few months. Philip, looking at the protagonist, wonders if he should run. Elsewhere, the background character is shocked after the protagonist mentions he'll spend 1 million on monster meat. They start discussing transportation costs for the meat, and Logan is planning to hire the entire mercenary guild to hunt the monsters. Philip agrees this method is good, but suggests going to the Merchants Guild because they'll sell anything for money, and they might supply all the Kalak meat in the kingdom upon request. This approach is quicker and cheaper, and right now the meat has no value, so they'll accept any price for it. Logan calls Philip an amazing kid because even he hadn't thought of this strategy. The man says that from now on, the protagonist shouldn't concern himself with money-related issues and should leave everything to him. Our hero asks for one more thing, which is for Philip to buy something in large quantities for now, handing him a note. The extra starts reading, seeing items like cartridges and blades made from Southern steel. Logan explains that he can't mention the materials for war weapons and adds that weapons made from these materials were used in the Empire's invasion during the previous conflict, noting that depending on combat conditions, it's a weapon a simple soldier can use to take down a knight. Before the invasion, the protagonist entrusted Dwayne with hiring mercenaries, and if he just puts these weapons in the hands of the soldiers, they'll certainly have the advantage in territorial battles. But first, he must find specialists to make these weapons and an instructor to train the mercenaries. 2 days later, in the mercenary city of Kurun, we see Logan asking a man named Kaisalan, an A-class mercenary, if he wants to be an instructor. The man says he's never trained people in a significant way. The protagonist explains it won't be hard and that he just needs to train the C-class mercenaries he's hiring. Kaisalan replies that he doesn't know where the protagonist heard this, but he's only taught a few moves to kids, suggesting that Logan leave instruction to a specialist. In his mind, our hero notes that in his previous life, he and Kaisalan worked together. So he knows that Kaisalan is a mercenary who masters all weapons and is skilled even in cavalry. Kaisalan's true value shines when he becomes an instructor, as after retiring due to severe injuries, the mercenary battalion he trained stands out among all others with far superior skills. However, the current Kaisalan seems unaware of his talent as an instructor. The protagonist adds that it's going to cost a lot of money. Logan offers a salary of 4,000 gold per month. The prospective instructor says the maximum for a mercenary of his rank is 2,000 gold, but the protagonist wants to pay double. Even so, Kaisalan refuses, saying he's never been an instructor. Our hero increases the offer, saying it'll now be 6,000 gold. The man replies he'd rather take on combat missions. Again, Logan raises the price, stating it'll now be 7,000 gold. Furious, Kaisalan punches the wall, asking if Logan didn't hear what he said. And does he think money solves everything? Lastly, Logan says it'll be 8,000 gold. Graciously, the instructor accepts the offer. The two begin talking about personal things. Kaisalan asks if the protagonist is from House McLean. Logan mentions he's curious about him, asking if he's hiring mercenaries in a remote location, isn't he? The instructor says there's no problem as long as our hero pays well. Someone in the distance shouts, telling them to move quickly. You see a pile of slaves being transported. Kaisalan comments that Logan probably knows Hurum is a city for mercenaries and slaves, and if he continues further in this area, he'll see more scenes like this. From here on, it's the slave markets. Logan acknowledges he knew about this, but admits it's still sad to see it. It didn't take long for people to start trying to get the protagonist's attention to buy slaves, but with just one look from Kaisalan, the background character trembled in fear. In the distance, our hero sees a tent with more guards than the others, suggesting this might be what he's looking for. An old man approaches and asks if Logan knows where he is. The protagonist says yes and states that he wants to buy a dwarf. The old man invites Logan into his tent, where we see elves with sunken eyes, dirty and likely with grim fates ahead of them. The old man explains that it took great effort to acquire these elf women, then asks if the protagonist has ever encountered an elf before. Before the man can say anything else, our hero points to the dwarf he wants. The dwarf appears to be in a better situation than the elves, and the old man mentions that a dwarf can be used for many things. This one in particular is one of the few craftsmen among the dwarven race. He goes on to explain that dwarven craftsmen are a lineage of dwarves who make and improve items from childhood through old age, finding their life's purpose through this craft. This dwarf is one of the best among them. Logan asks how much this dwarf costs. The old man says he's in the range of 250,000 gold but offers a discount, setting it at 200,000 gold. With a calm face, the protagonist asks the old man if he thinks he's an idiot. The old man is confused, and within a few minutes, the protagonist manages to pay just 50,000 gold, 150,000 less than the original price. The dwarf comments that humans are very greedy, and Logan responds that greed is the basis of commerce. The little old man asks where the protagonist is taking him. Logan says he's taking him to the southeastern region of McLean, where he'll be preparing the items our hero needs. The dwarf doesn't seem too thrilled, asking if that's all there is. Logan replies that if the dwarf works hard for the next 20 years, he'll return him to the mountains where he belongs. He adds that 20 years isn't much for his kind. Our little dwarf gives a happy, cute smile and says he's looking forward to when that day comes. Suddenly, some guards chase after an escaping elf. A boy carries the elf and sprints past the protagonist at high speed. A blonde guy manages to kick both children trying to escape. An old man with a bleeding arm is furious, calling them scoundrels and asking how they dare try to escape. The girl, pinned under her brother, cries and tells him to run. Kaizelon says they're just slaves and there's no need to worry. They should continue their journey. The protagonist looks at the slave and starts listing his characteristics. Red and blue eyes, blue hair, and elf-like despite not being one. Then our hero notes that this child is Victor, who in the future will become a noble killer and a powerful magic user. When he was a slave, he killed his master to escape, then returned 10 years later to annihilate his master's family, earning him the nickname Noble Killer. Logan reflects that such a powerful figure is now just a little boy in front of him, and if he lets him escape, he'll become one of the future magic users who could be on his side. The protagonist mentions that there's a big caveat though, because Victor is an obsessive killer who can't be stopped. Just as the blonde man is about to kick the boy again, Logan shields him with the scabbard of his sword. The bald man wonders who this guy is that's defending his property. Before the extra can say anything, he notices the armor with the McLean family crest, and then he gently pulls back, saying that the protagonist is a guest who appeared at an inappropriate time. He was disciplining his slaves because they weren't following instructions. Logan states that he wants to buy the two slaves, then asks for the price. The bald man says it's 10,000 gold. Our hero thinks that a young slave usually costs 300 gold, so how does this old scoundrel expect to earn dozens of times more for weak and malnourished children? But the price of the noble killer would be at least 100,000 gold, though this bald man isn't aware of it. So he tells the old man that the rate of children on the brink of collapse is over 30%, and besides, one of them looks like they might die soon. The bald man tries to deceive our hero, saying these are the only slaves for sale at the moment. Logan offers 500 gold. The man keeps talking, trying to make the protagonist pay much more than he should. Our hero asks if he doesn't think Logan knows the actual price of slaves, and he emanates his aura, making the extra quite frightening, so with no other choice, he sells Logan the two slaves for 1,000 gold coins. Kaizelon carries the injured boy on his back while his sister walks beside them, calling out to him. The boy wakes up quickly and seems to recover from his injury faster than expected. The protagonist finds this impressive, but secretly we see that Logan was transferring his life force to the boy, which is more effective than low-level holy magic. Yet the little girl seems to be noticing his energy clearly, even when Kaizelon didn't catch it. How can such a young girl do that? The boy suddenly jumps on the protagonist, telling him to die. Logan easily dodges and grabs Victor's arm and his neck, asking if Victor is brave or just a fool, and remarks that the young boy doesn't understand his situation. He adds that he's not like the other guy, and it's good that Victor has a fighting spirit, but he must choose his enemies wisely. Logan warns that this should be his final notice, saying that if he follows the instructions, he'll guarantee the safety of him and his sister. But if something like this happens again, he won't just get rid of Victor. His sister will also face a grim fate. Logan lets the boy go and kneels, then says he's planning to train Victor to be a knight. The boy seems impressed, so the protagonist continues, explaining that a knight has an almost noble status and will naturally be free from slavery. Not only him, but his sister won't be a slave either. Victor looks at his beautiful sister, always wanting the best for her, and now has a chance to make that happen. The boy looks at our hero and shouts that he accepts. Logan notes that his sister is the key to controlling his destructive nature. The protagonist says that Victor's training will start as soon as they reach the McLean household. In addition, he calls for the dwarf Hamar for a private conversation. In another setting, alone with Hammer, Logan explains that he's prepared the contract, a magical contract similar to the one he gave Philip. The contract states that after 20 years of work, the dwarf must be returned to his family in the mountains. Hamar is thrilled to read this and starts signing the contract. The dwarf says he's very grateful to Logan. The protagonist observes how just one contract could revitalize the dwarf's enthusiasm, achieving everything he sought in this journey, and it's good to know that the preparations for the territorial war are going well. However, One thing the protagonist didn't know is that rumors about Logan's peculiar behavior began spreading throughout the city, and as a result, his reputation sank to an all-time low. Moreover, Rick, our hero's servant, endured various forms of torment to prevent these rumors from worsening. Back at the McLean household, Rick appears, saying that his young master has returned, and with his saintly expression, he gets close to the protagonist, asking why he didn't consider his state before leaving. He asks what the heck our hero was doing out there to have taken so long. He mentions that the locals are saying all sorts of things about young Master Logan, the McLean house prince, the legendary monster lover who spent over 150,000 gold pieces on monster meat. These rumors had started a few days ago. Elsewhere, it turns out Philip started these rumors, his plan to draw the merchant's attention. But he didn't realize Logan's reputation was already terrible. Prince Logan, whose engagement was cancelled, the man who blackmailed his own fiancée for money. But contrary to what everyone might expect, Philip shouted that 1 gold piece per kilo. He adds, asking what merchant would refuse to turn trash into money. He asks if they want some and urges them to gather as many monsters as possible. And that's how the rumors started. Our hero laughs, saying that Philip did a great job. Rick questions if this is the time to laugh. He asks Logan to look at his friend's expressions and understand the murmurs among the locals, adding that it's not a quiet moment because the patriarch seems quite irritated. In the patriarch's room, he asks if Logan took the opportunity to run away from home. Our hero says that wasn't running away, it was more like a little trip. His father says that when he heard the rumors, it seemed like the protagonist was quite excited, and at least he looked satisfied. Logan responds that rumors are just rumors, and he feels no shame for what he did. His stepmother tells the patriarch that the young master is unaware of his own situation, and if this continues, the family's reputation will be damaged. Without remorse, our hero says his stepmother is being overly hasty, and he used the wedding money however he wanted. The old woman gets angry and asks the patriarch if he's going to allow this. Suddenly, Logan's father shouts for everyone to be quiet, saying he wants to be alone with the protagonist. The stepmother tries to say something, but the patriarch orders her to be quiet. After a while, Logan's father asks what's going on, wondering why his son is doing such crazy things and stating that he'll speak frankly, father to son. The protagonist responds that the patriarch wouldn't understand even if he explained. His father says he doesn't doubt Logan's understanding, but has heard many people speak ill of him. Comments like the young master being violent and cruel, obsessed with money, recently losing his mind. His father asks one last time how long he should keep protecting Logan. If there's a deadline, just say it, so Logan can apologize and say he did it for his deceased mother. Our hero is surprised because his father has never mentioned his mother before. It seems the patriarch hasn't lost hope of finding her. The protagonist asks for 1 year to clarify his actions and pleads for him to wait until then. Then Logan leaves his father's room. The patriarch reflects, never imagining such words would come from his son's mouth. He adds that if the protagonist doesn't prove his point in a year, he'll have to make a tough decision. And before being a father, he is the Lord of House McLean. He apologizes to Logan's mother, whose photo he holds as he has no idea what the protagonist is thinking. He promised to protect and raise him, but he feels he might have been too negligent by thinking this way. Elsewhere, we see Logan surprised that his younger brother has awakened his core. Ronian says it was difficult, but he managed in the end. In his past life, Ronian awakened his core during the regional battle, so Logan didn't expect him to awaken at such a young age. His brother says it's all thanks to Logan. Ronian mentions that the knights tried to stop him from seeing Logan. The protagonist is more surprised because Ronian managed to awaken his core just to find him, and when he did, he defeated the knights. Our hero remarks that when Ronian's power stabilizes, he'll teach him the celestial sword technique, and he could become much stronger than he was in his past life if he continues down this path. In a rest house in southern McLean, the protagonist talks with Dwayne. He says the C-class mercenaries he recruited are here, totaling about 350. The mercenaries start arguing among themselves, wondering if this is the client and questioning if they haven't been deceived. Another one says it's impossible for a baron to hire the mercenary guild unless he's crazy. Someone else says the rumors about the protagonist aren't very good. A bald man had the audacity to say that Logan is just wearing armor to try to look like a soldier. At this point, the protagonist gets the bald man's attention and repeats the joke he made, causing him to wonder how Logan heard him from that distance. Logan says that if he can judge, it means he has a superior skill. So what kind of skill does a C-class mercenary have to ignore others? He asks if what he's saying is bothering him and notes that the bald man seems to have some pride. The protagonist proposes that if the bald man can land at least one blow on him, he'll pay him a whole year's worth of supplies, swearing by honor with everyone as witnesses. Fearlessly, the bald man charges at Logan. Everyone is impressed by the bald man's size and wonders if he's actually a B-class mercenary. Selfishly, he says that Logan can make the first attack. The protagonist asks if he's sure. The bald man says not to worry, he doubts a punch could hurt him. In a split second, the big man gets punched in the mouth and everyone is shocked. With one punch, the bald man is on the ground, while the protagonist looks down at him. Logan stretches, asking who's next. Everyone is nervous because Logan already has a core at his age. Even Kaisalon admits he knew the protagonist was a bit unusual, but not to this extent. Logan introduces himself to everyone and says many might be curious why he hired so many mercenaries. Our hero explains that he gathered everyone to train them in cavalry using crossbows. People start murmuring among themselves, some questioning if anyone has ever shot a crossbow while on horseback and pointing out that reloading takes a long time. Kaisalon warns Logan that crossbows aren't efficient for cavalry use. The protagonist says he understands and explains that crossbows have more firepower than bows, and novices take about a minute to reload a crossbow, typically needing to brace it with a counterweight. However, even if you're riding a horse, even if you carry several preloaded crossbows, the firepower runs out in less than a minute, which can seem complex. It might seem like Logan is toying with his money, but he says he's very confident. Our hero asks Kaisalon to train them well, adding that this crossbow cavalry will become an overwhelming force, providing a significant advantage in the territorial war, greatly benefiting House McLean. A few days later, we see Logan with a qualification letter, noting that out of 350, only 312 passed the test, which is decent. Hamar asks the protagonist what that is. Logan explains it's the crossbow project that the dwarf will work on. Our hero says this crossbow was a weapon he used for decades in his previous life, and he designed its structure from memory. Hamar is quite skilled, so he might be able to make the crossbow. The dwarf starts listing the features the weapon should have, including a cartridge attached at the back to store the bolts and reload them automatically, and it should be able to fire 3 bolts at once. Hamar asks who came up with this silly idea. Logan says it was him. The dwarf admits that upon closer inspection it's quite clever. However, he points out that with this design, the string might not withstand so many continuous shots and could break. Attaching a wooden box at the back might also cause discomfort for the shooter. He asks how the protagonist plans to solve these problems. Logan suggests reducing the size of the bolts to decrease the cartridge's size, making it disposable after use, and modulating the cartridge to reload after each shot. From now on, they'll call it a magazine. Hamar says that's absurd because even for a skilled shooter, it's hard to fire twice in 1 minute, so this would be beyond common sense. Logan mentions it's a weapon developed in the future. Our favorite dwarf says the materials are minimal. It's just a cartridge, a piece of metal, a string, and a bow. The protagonist asks how long it would take to make something like this and says if it seems impossible, he could give up. Without any hesitation, Hamar says it would only take 1 month to make something far superior. In a different setting, we see someone running, and upon closer inspection, it's Victor. Logan is training the boy to the extreme, and he seems very exhausted. Without stopping, our hero observes that it hasn't been 3 days, but Victor has already changed significantly. The protagonist shouts for the boy to rest, after which he collapses from exhaustion. His sister rushes over to take care of him, and Logan comments that a 14-year-old just ran 20 kilometers. Indeed, the boy has talent, and he likes his perseverance to keep fighting until the end. Logan says the violence of an assassin doesn't come from their nature. The reason Victor changed so much in his past life is probably because something happened to his sister. Soon, the protagonist calls the boy to continue training, announcing that from now on, he'll teach him the Grandia Kingdom's fencing style. Anyone who is a knight's apprentice in this country learns it. Our hero tells Victor to watch as he demonstrates the fencing, raising a gust of wind with 1 stroke. In his mind, the boy admits he's very tired and on the verge of collapse. But if the price for this fatigue is food and a comfortable bed, it's all worth it. Victor then mimics Logan's movement. The protagonist is impressed because with just 1 demonstration, the boy could do the same thing, and he's sure his brother Ronian isn't on Victor's level. Our hero tells Victor that if he increases his endurance and can perform the Grandia fencing style over 1,000 times perfectly, he could be called a knight. Hearing this, Victor's eyes light up, excited about the possibility of becoming a knight. Logan says that if Victor needs anything else, he can ask Rick, but the boy says he doesn't need anything except he asks the protagonist to take care of his sister. Logan notes that even if the boy isn't involved in the war, he'll become a necessary force for the conflict, and the mercenaries training with Kaisalon will be a uniquely powerful force. However, being overly optimistic about expectations can be somewhat problematic. Hamar might not properly manufacture the crossbow, and the mercenaries might not use it correctly. That's why he can only be cautiously optimistic about the future, and he also needs to prepare another plan. Elsewhere, with the patriarch, he asks if the protagonist wants to participate in knight training. Logan confirms, saying that he wants to do that. In another place, we see a forest illuminated by a sunny day. In the Heinkel McLean training field, the commander of the knights calls for the attention of all his soldiers. He states that from that day on, the young master Logan will join their training. Some soldiers are astonished, not believing that someone with such a bad reputation as Logan would be joining them in training. Even Heinkel feels a bit uncomfortable with the situation, but remains silent. In a flashback, the knight remembers the moment when he received orders from Patrick to train Logan. Heinkel tries to argue that this would create dissatisfaction among the knights, but Patrick responds that he wasn't asking for Logan to receive special treatment. Then, using his authority, he orders the chief of the knights to treat the boy like a new recruit and put him through intense training. Back in the present, Heinkel thinks that even so, Logan was still the Lord's son, and it would have been easier if Patrick had asked to train the boy gently. Seeing that the chief of the cavalry was deep in thought, Logan tells him not to worry. He says that if he falls behind even once during the week of training, he will quit on his own. Seeing this as an opportunity, Henkel quickly agrees. And in his mind with malice, he thinks that for the next week, the intensity of the knights' training will be tripled. Next, we see several knights running through the forest carrying their companions on their backs. Upon hearing complaints, Henkel orders everyone to be quiet since they are knights who ride horses, so they should also understand the feelings of the animals. The man explains that this training was meant to make them feel what it's like to be a horse carrying armored knights across the battlefield. The soldiers then start talking among themselves, saying that all of this was happening because of Logan. They also mention that at this pace, the heir of the McLean family wouldn't last long and would soon flee. However, contrary to their expectations, the boy is running steadily, not complaining about anything, while carrying one of his companions on his back. In the blink of an eye, he manages to walk with extreme ease and begins leading the group of soldiers. Henkel, seeing this, thinks that this should be impossible and can't even believe that Logan is leading the troop. And worst of all, Logan is still smiling, even with such hellish training. The man also comments to himself that at this pace, it won't be the redhead who gives up, but the other knights. So he makes a decision and orders everyone to stop immediately. Finally, he announces that they will all have a 10-minute break to rest, and the knights collapse exhausted. Logan is disappointed that he can't continue his training. Henkel approaches him and asks how the young master is feeling. The chief of the guard questions whether Logan is feeling heavy, while thinking that if the boy was honest and said it was really difficult, they could stop. However, surprising the man, the boy responds that he can handle it. The boy also adds that the training is excellent, and that if the knights actually did this training every day, they must be incredibly strong. Then the boy says that he is eager for more training like this. At that moment, the chief of the guard becomes really uncomfortable and practically gives up on his entire plan. Our protagonist, seeing this reaction, doesn't understand why and simply decides to ignore it. At night, Logan is in the middle of the forest, wondering if all the knights have already left. The young man thinks that the knight's training is only a backup in case all his plans fail, so he intends to form a friendship with the other knights. Logan also reflects on his power, as while strength can increase through meditation, it's important to train his physical body as well. Therefore, the knight's training will be very useful for him. And at that moment, the boy activates his power and realizes something. McLean truly sees a change, and smiling, the boy says that all the effort is paying off. He grabs his sword while stating that with the growth of his core strength, he barely feels tired. The boy concentrates his force into his weapon and focuses for a moment. Then he closes his eyes and draws his weapon with extreme ease. Logan comments that even though his force core is still at 1 star, his power is already quite significant. So maybe if he reaches 2 stars, he could have a strength comparable to an advanced knight like Patrick. On another day, several models of crossbows are presented to Logan, but he rejects all of them. The boy asks the dwarf for the repeating crossbow he requested and besides that, he makes other complaints. Hammer becomes extremely irritated by this, and noticing it, Logan apologizes for being rude. The dwarf says that even though Logan is his master, he shouldn't trample on the pride of a craftsman. Feigning ignorance, Logan comments that if that was truly the best the dwarf could do, there wasn't much else to say. Trying to hit the dwarf's weak spot, the young man begins to say that he didn't imagine that after several weeks, this was all Hammer had done. The young man also mentions that he was wrong to expect too much from the craftsman, and Hammer starts to get deeply irritated by the insults. Almost breaking the crossbow in his hands, the dwarf asserts that he will remake the weapon that was requested and show the result to Logan in a month. He then breaks the crossbow in his hands in 2, demonstrating his dissatisfaction. Watching the dwarf leave in a fury, Logan thinks that he was truly upset enough to start the project from scratch. With a malicious expression, our protagonist thinks that if the dwarf is pressured even more, he might produce something even more incredible. A month later, Hammer was showing his new project to Logan. Upon firing the crossbow, the weapon shoots quickly, and 2 bolts hit the target. The dwarf asks what his master thought, while explaining that even though he shot 1 less bolt than originally requested, it was easy to hold in 1 hand. Hearing this, Logan thinks to himself that it was unbelievable since it took less than 5 seconds to reload and fire the crossbow. He also comments that although the range and size were less effective than those in his past life for cavalry, it was incredible, and the performance was exceptional. Ignoring all the dwarf's remarks, Logan can only think about how they still had months before the war, and even so, they had already achieved extremely good results. Seeing that he was being ignored, Hammer asks what the young man was thinking. But suddenly, Logan grabs the dwarf in his arms and starts saying that he did a good job. The protagonist continues praising the dwarf, while the small man becomes extremely shy from having his work recognized. With an extremely gentle look, he says Hammer's name, and the dwarf, blushing, asks why his master was calling him. However, changing his expression, the young man asks if the dwarf could make 400 of those crossbows in 2 months. After a time skip, we see someone else firing the new crossbow and hitting a tree dead on, piercing it. The person testing the weapon was Kaisalan, who remains silent for a moment. The mercenaries behind him comment that it was incredible since the shots go very far and the consecutive firing of bolts was quite impressive. Kaisolun couldn't believe it, thinking it was impossible for a crossbow to be reloaded from the front and still have all that range, power, and speed. He thinks that if an army of 300 or more mounted troops were armed with those crossbows, they would be practically invincible. The man tells Logan that he truly was incredible, since that's why the young man had talked about cavalry with crossbows. Shy, the boy agrees while thinking that even so, Hamar had a lot of difficulty with it. The claim reflects that even with a few extra craftsmen helping the dwarf, he couldn't have imagined Hamar would complete it in 2 weeks. The young man also states that he would like to share this with the Order of Knights and Soldiers, but there would be some problems, including the risk of leaking the technology. Logan tells Kaisolon that from that day forward, the man should equip the mercenaries with the crossbows and kill all the monsters around that territory. The redhead, seeing his vassal's hesitant attitude, asks if the mercenary thought it was impossible. Kaisolon feels challenged for a moment, and looking at the bolts that hit the tree, he says it might be possible. Our protagonist finally asks him not to dwell on pessimistic thoughts but rather make it possible, because if he doesn't succeed, all of it will be in vain. The mercenary, looking at his master, thinks that the young man didn't make that weapon to subjugate monsters and wonders if the boy was preparing for a war. Sometime later, a soldier is commenting that someone had enormous stamina. The person the soldier was referring to was our protagonist, who was carrying 2 companions on his back. Other members of the army watch the scene, trying to understand how the boy could be so strong. The 2 knights continue gossiping about how it was incredible to think that Logan, after losing to his brother, managed to turn things around and become much stronger. And even more impressive was how he had been consistently enduring the training for more than a month. The training was initially designed for Logan to quit, but it had now solidified into a new symbol for the Order of Knights. It became an unexpected motivation for the lower-ranking knights who had been taking it easy during their training and becoming weak. Because of this, the members of the army started to truly understand and empathize with their horses, forming bonds of friendship with the animals. One of the knights being carried by his friend comments that he had eaten too much the night before and apologizes for it. His companion tells him not to worry about his weight since he would carry his friend no matter what. The final bonus generated by this new training was the strengthening of bonds between the knights. Heinkel comments that he persisted with the training because the young master hadn't given up, but he hadn't expected the results to be so immense. Looking at Logan, the man admires the boy and is extremely happy with his presence. As he feels something tingling in his neck as if he's being watched, our protagonist starts to wonder if he's tired or sick. As night falls, we see the redhead meditating cross-legged on his bed. The boy was thinking that after pushing his body to the limit with the training, he had been stimulating his internal consciousness with meditation and was making progress. Logan states that he had seen signs of a shift in strength, and if he could improve his martial powers according to his expectations, whether as a superhuman or a master or archmage, he could surpass all the monsters he had seen in his past life. Finally, the boy sighs and his core begins to glow intensely. He starts to speak in an unknown language and his heart begins to pump even harder. All that energy from the core starts to spill out across the room and spread. Then suddenly, what seemed to be a completely disorganized core turns into a perfect sphere. Logan celebrates, exclaiming that his 2-star core is finally complete. The young man states that he now has the foundation to learn the next technique from the sword's secrets. He also comments that, considering the power that the first technique gave him, he was sure the second technique would be even more powerful. The boy also mentions that if he could specialize in this technique before the war, not even a high-ranking knight would be able to stop him. The next day, the sun shines over a flat field. Some monsters are roaming around the territory when they start hearing the sounds of galloping horses. The monsters see an army of humans riding horses and begin to run. Kaisolun finally gives the order to his allies, clenching his fist. Then, all the mercenaries begin to enter a specific formation to eliminate the monsters. They aim their crossbows, and after entering a proper formation, they fire at the undead. The creatures try to run, but they are easily hit by the bolts. Several monsters are struck in the back and finished off almost instantly. Finally, they manage to corner and defeat all the beasts. Even after all this, Kaisolun remains silent for a moment. The mercenaries are impressed by what they were able to accomplish. Everyone is extremely happy with the new weapon, as it had practically no recoil and was extremely effective. Logan is also present, observing and analyzing the progress of his soldiers. The boy states in his mind that the swarm of more than 100 monsters was wiped out in less than 10 seconds, and the mercenaries had practically mastered the new crossbow. Finally, he mentions that it was worth the effort to hunt so far from the territory. Kaisolun asks if his master was satisfied, and the boy replies that he was, since the mercenaries were a complete mess during the first hunt, but had improved greatly. The long-haired man, hearing this, remains silent for a moment. Then he asks why Logan was making all these preparations. Since he had never heard of a mercenary army with that much firepower, he wonders if the Lord was planning to hunt monsters across the entire continent. But before Logan could respond, he hears someone calling his name. An unknown knight arrives at the scene, extremely breathless and tired. Kaisolun asks what was happening, and the unknown person says that someone named Rick sent him there. Our protagonist is confused, but before he can say anything, the man explains that something happened the day before. He says that Viscount Tesseran has declared war against the McLean family. Upon hearing this, Logan appears extremely shocked and astonished. Through a crystal ball, Viscount Tesseran can be seen extremely angry, declaring that due to the grudge over his ancestors' murder, he blames the McLean house. On the other side, watching this transmission was Patrick, extremely confused. Later, in the meeting room, some nobles were discussing that it was something from the past, yet Tesseran was now blaming the McLean family. Heinkel then questions what the patriarch of the family will do. The man says that only Tesseran's order of knights has a larger number than theirs, and even if Patrick goes, the chances are slim. Chaos erupts in the meeting room, and all the nobles start trying to decide what they should do. Meanwhile, Patrick, extremely irritated, slams his fist against the table. He then orders everyone to shut up immediately. The patriarch states that even though the authority of the royal family is not as strong as it used to be, Tesseran simply declared war without asking, meaning everything was planned. Because of this, Patrick mentions that those who spoke about making peace didn't even think before saying anything. He then orders everyone to prepare for war and make a plan for victory. The nobles are reluctant about that decision, but they cannot deny it. One of the people in the room asks if the young masters will also go to battle. Ronia's mother becomes extremely worried at that sudden question. Marion then turns to her husband for an answer. Patrick, determined, says that his sons will also go to war. He explains that Ronian's strength has awakened and Logan is also of age, so he must do his part. With that, the nobles become a bit more hopeful since the two were promising knights. Rick, upon hearing all this, becomes anxious because it was bad news as young Master Logan was far from the territory. He then runs out of the room thinking he must warn his master about this as quickly as possible. It is then revealed that this entire flashback was narrated by the man who came to give Logan the warning. For some reason, our protagonist remains silent but extremely troubled. He thinks that based on his memories from his past life, the war wasn't supposed to start for at least 2 more months. The messenger also urges Logan to hurry as the Tesseran house completely ignored tradition and was already moving toward battle. Upon hearing this, McLean makes up his mind, stating that there was no more time to think. Behind him, Castellan informs him that the mercenary army is ready and all the men agree. The young man is surprised by this sudden readiness and asks Kai why he doesn't seem very shocked that a war has begun. Kai replies to his master that mercenaries are lovers of war, so they are always prepared. Besides, they also have an excellent weapon in hand, and of course, they wanted to use it. Logan, observing the knights, comments in his mind that those guys seemed very confident. However, that confidence was valid, and finally the boy gives a small smile of relief. He recalls that they had unilaterally massacred a group of monsters, and no matter if a war had started, all they needed to do was win it. Then smiling, the young man states that they had enough combat power at that moment. The McLean house was eager for the unexpected war, and all 314 people trained by Logan were confident of victory. The narrator explains that the war began sooner than the McLeans expected, and the day after the declaration of war, Tesseran's troops appeared. Inside the mansion, a soldier informs Patrick that Tesseran's troops number more than 1,100 regular soldiers, not including the recruits. Hearing this, the McLean patriarch becomes desperate, wondering when Hammond had become so insane. The man thinks that Tesseran wasn't satisfied with just his soldiers and had also called in recruits for the battle. Furious, the man tries to understand why Tesseran was going to such lengths. The soldier who informed him had more to say. He communicates that House Kairos had informed them that they couldn't provide troops, and hearing this, Marion is confused. The woman panics, stating that this wasn't possible and there must be some mistake. The messenger explains that Lord Dwayne himself had been with House Kairos multiple times and there was no mistake. With this, Patrick becomes anxious as he tries to think of a solution. Then he orders his soldier to gather all the men who can bear arms because they will respond with full force. The narrator comments that their trusted allies, the Kairos, had turned their backs on Patrick and cornered. The McLeans gathered as many men as they could to fight. Thus, they gathered only 53 knights, 552 regular troops who had some knowledge of battle, 4,418 recruits, meaning there was a total of 5,000 people for the fight. The McLean army, standing before Tesseran's soldiers, is extremely intimidated since they are not even half the size of their enemy's army. Patrick, who was leading the battle, sighed, worried about what was going to happen. One of the soldiers asked his colleague where the first young master was, and his friend replied that he had left a long time ago and had not yet returned. They also commented that the boy probably wouldn't come back and must have fled after hearing the news about the battle. Logan's brother overheard the conversation and got angry, questioning what his subordinates were talking about. He then affirmed that there was no way his brother would do something like that. Ronian remembered the moment he saw Logan training. He also told the soldiers that the first young master had already anticipated that this war would happen for some reason. In a flashback, Logan can be seen saying that a technique was taught to Ronian and that they would save the family together. However, despite this, all the soldiers ignored him and started spreading the rumor that Logan had fled. Patrick accepted this fate and asked Ronian to take on his brother's role in his place. He also asked his son not to hesitate at any moment, regardless of what happens. McLean thought he didn't want to believe the rumor, but it didn't matter anymore at that moment because they had to win the war. Then with his massive lance, he raised his weapon and ordered his men to attack. The two armies charged toward each other, and a battle ensued. Hammond smiled maliciously, pleased that Patrick had finally drawn his sword. Shortly after, he said that his knights were his swords and commanded his soldiers to now face Patrick McLean. Seeing dozens of soldiers coming at him, Patrick was not afraid and charged forward. A red aura began to envelop his horse and his lance. Patrick thought that he first needed to break through the vanguard, which would give him the advantage. The king then summoned all his strength, preparing to deliver a powerful blow, and immediately afterward he leaped with his horse, striking the shield of one of his enemy's soldiers. However, the patriarch was stunned to see that the soldier who seemed ordinary blocked his attack. The soldier, on the other hand, simply smiled maliciously. Elsewhere, Rick was also in the midst of the chaos. Looking around, the young man saw several of his companions being eliminated and others wounded. No matter which direction he looked, Rick saw people begging for help. The man began to tremble, thinking that things were going terribly wrong and that they were losing. Rick stated that they were at such a disadvantage in the war that the McLeans had to send subordinates like him. Suddenly, a blow struck the man's head, causing Rick to fall to the ground. An enemy knight wielding a lance charged to finish off the poor subordinate. However, for some reason, the knight missed, and it was revealed that his chest had been struck by some object. Another soldier from the McLean family saved the man and asked Rick to get up and raise his weapon. The subordinate was overjoyed to see an ally and extended his hand toward him. But in a moment of happiness, drops of ketchup splattered on his face. Suddenly, the soldier who had helped him collapsed to the ground with an arrow in his neck. The subordinate screamed in despair and started running. The only thought in his mind was that he needed to flee to the rear and get as far away from the enemies as possible. However, as he ran, all he could see was the ketchup of his companions splattering on his body. Looking to the side, Rick saw the bodies of his fallen allies and fell into complete despair. The man saw an army of mounted soldiers heading his way and thought that they had even surrounded the McLean rear. And the only conclusion Rick could come to was that everyone would die there. We then returned to the scene where Patrick's fight was taking place. After delivering several attacks and seeing that his opponent was barely injured, the patriarch became even more anxious. The soldier, who was still standing despite his injuries, stated that Patrick definitely lived up to his name, as they had made many preparations and yet were still struggling. Patrick, confused, could only think that this unknown warrior withstood his powerful attacks and still remained standing. He commented that he hadn't expected Tezrin to have a high-ranking knight. The man also mentioned that, in addition, the four others surrounding him were at least intermediate-ranked knights. Patrick then asked if these were the people prepared to deal with him. The knight who had been withstanding his attacks asked what Patrick thought of their preparations. Seeing that he was completely surrounded, the patriarch lowered his head, but he remembered that if he were blocked there, the order of knights would also be trapped. The man dropped his lance to the ground and immediately drew his sword. Determined, he charged forward on his horse, declaring that he wouldn't let this happen, no matter what. He clashed his sword against his opponents, creating a gust of wind throughout the area. The knight, who had been enduring those attacks for a long time, lowered his guard for a second. Seeing a chance to finish the man, McLean moved to strike him. However, he turned back and noticed another person approaching with a lance. The warrior behind him quickly attacked, almost hitting him. Realizing he was caught in a trap and being attacked from all sides, he grew frustrated. Patrick asked his enemies if they had no pride as knights, yet the enemies continued mocking him and treating him as nothing. The strongest warrior told his companions to be cautious because Patrick was still a high-ranking and well-trained knight. Tired of it all, Patrick jumped off his horse and charged with all his might to attack one of his opponents. Once again, he collided his weapon against his enemies, creating a loud crash. However, he realized that another person behind him was attempting to strike, but it was too late, and McLean was hit. The lancer, feeling extremely confident, moved in for another strike. McLean backed away, avoiding the blow but bleeding from his stomach. He understood that the enemy's plan was for the high-ranking knight to block his blows while the others attacked him from all sides. The man also saw that his army's entire vanguard had been overrun, and the situation was dire. Even so, he didn't falter, and while pressing his hand against his wound, he remained ready to fight. In his final thoughts, the man reflected that Loven had done well to flee, as they had no chance of winning. Facing the formation of soldiers, he also hoped that at least his eldest son would continue the family's legacy. Watching everything from a distance was Tezrin, who simply observed his enemy's defeat. He thought to himself that it was a wise decision to hire a high-ranking knight. Now all he had to do was destroy Patrick and take over the McLean castle. However, a loud noise echoed, and Hammond was startled. He realized that the noise was the sound of cavalry troops. Suddenly, one of his subordinates came running toward him, frantic. The guard informed the Viscount that a cavalry unit was arriving at the rear, consisting of at least 300 enemies. Hammond, hearing this, was confused because he thought the McLeans no longer had elite troops. However, before he could respond, the knight explained that the most peculiar thing was that they weren't carrying lances. The only weapons they had were small crossbows. Hearing this, the Viscount laughed, as those weapons were only used by hunters. Hammond then ordered his army to use the rear cavalry and archers to eliminate that force. Tesseran also stated that they weren't elite troops, but rather useless soldiers who would soon die. Suddenly, however, the warrior speaking to Tesseran was struck by several flaming arrows. The Viscount panicked at the sight and, looking to the side, saw something terrifying. All 300 cavalrymen were pointing lances at him, including Logan. The boy had an anxious expression. After witnessing the massacre of Inclane family soldiers, Logan was furious. Filled with rage, he ordered everyone to open fire on the enemy. The only thing Tesseran could see was hundreds of arrows flying toward his army. The Viscount's knights could only watch as the massive rain of arrows descended upon them. One of the soldiers couldn't believe that the Inclanes had this kind of force. Then the massacre began and many knights were killed. However, one of Tesseran's soldiers managed to defend himself with his shield. The young man, standing beside the bodies of his fallen comrades, was astonished by the situation. Trembling, he realized that all those who hadn't raised their shields had died in the blink of an eye. Tesseran's archers decided to counterattack and prepared their arrows. They drew their bowstrings and got ready to fire at their enemies. However, after shooting, they all noticed that due to the distance, the arrows didn't reach the Inclane troops. As he looked at his enemies with those strange crossbows, one of the soldiers wondered how the bolts could reach so far. But before he could ponder it further, one of the arrows came straight toward his head. All the archers who had attempted to counterattack were quickly taken down. The Viscount, now worried, began to question how the rear had turned into chaos in just a second. Panicking, he thought that those knights hadn't even used magic. They had only used a few crossbows, and that had been enough to neutralize part of his army. Determined to win the war, Hammond ordered one of his surviving soldiers to bring the cavalry. Soon after, he raised the flag, the symbol of his country, and all the cavalrymen saw it. The knights understood the call and immediately headed toward their lord. A large number of mounted soldiers charged to aid the Viscount. Seeing his reinforcements arrive, Hammond ordered all his troops to attack the Inclanes immediately. From a distance, our protagonist watched the scene unfold. With a malicious expression, he celebrated that his enemies were walking right into the trap on their own. Elsewhere, amid the war, two swords clash, revealing that our protagonist's brother was in battle. The boy noticed an attack coming his way and quickly dodged by ducking. Ronian's enemy congratulated him for managing to evade the strike. However, one of the soldiers approached his ally and insisted that they didn't have time for this game, as the battle was taking a turn. But the man responded that Ronian wasn't a game. He was a difficult opponent. The Viscount's soldier then urged his comrade to look to the side, and he did. While his enemy was distracted, Ronian thought that now, having participated in a real battle rather than training, he understood that he wasn't a genius. Gripping his sword tightly, he also acknowledged that despite this, he couldn't lose. The boy remembered his father's words, asking him to take on his brother's role, and with determination, Ronian said he couldn't die there. However, the boy noticed something and, looking ahead, saw that his opponent was distracted. Without much thought, taking advantage of the opportunity, he charged at the warrior. The boy swung his sword, striking directly at the back of his enemy's neck, finishing him off. Ronian was confused, as he had managed to cut down his opponent with extreme ease. He observed the enemy's body beginning to fall and noticed some bolts scattered beside it. Looking at the knight's body, he realized that his target was filled with holes made by bolts. And seeing what lay before him, the boy recognized something that made him happy. Ronian saw his inspiration, his brother, right in front of him. The boy was extremely happy to realize that his brother Logan had not fled the battle and was saving everyone. However, suddenly, several knights from Tesseran's army began riding past the boy. The guard captain ordered his soldiers to attack anyone holding a crossbow. Faced with an army of knights in front of him, Logan thought for a moment. He noticed they were in a shield formation and complimented the strategy. One of the mercenaries then suggested his allies aim at the ground to execute a certain strategy, as the arrows wouldn't penetrate the shields. However, he looked at Logan and saw that the boy was thinking about something. With an extremely malicious and terrible expression, our protagonist ordered his allies to shoot the horses. The mercenaries, sharing that psychopathic expression, readily agreed. After that, they all fired the defenseless enemy horses. As a result, Hammond's knights began to fall violently to the ground. Confident, Logan laughed, thinking that this army had completely failed. Watching his brother, he was glad to have arrived in time to help Ronian. But he still needed to help his father, as he had determined to save his family in this life. It made no sense to win the battle, but lose a family member. Logan then instructed Kazalun to take command of the mercenaries. The man tried to protest, as their plan was to attack from outside the range. However, seeing Logan leave, Kazalun didn't understand why the boy was seemingly running to his death when victory was right in front of them. He also thought that Logan might be strong, but if he clashed with an intermediate rank knight, he could be killed. Realizing he had no choice, Kazalun accepted and ordered all his allies to cover for Logan's absence. At that moment, Patrick was engaged in a battle, having just struck and been struck by the high-ranking knight. The man was extremely frustrated, unable to believe that this cursed knight had come at him knowing he would be hit. Before he could come up with a plan, other intermediate-ranked knights came charging at him. Despite his injuries and after enduring several blows, the Patriarch managed to flee and escape the attack. Even so, due to his open wounds, the man spilled even more strawberry juice. As he tried to stop the bleeding, he realized something strange. His enemies had suddenly changed their approach to attacking. Once again, two intermediate-ranked knights charged at Patrick, intending to finish him off. Patrick noticed that for some reason his enemies were desperately throwing themselves at him despite having the advantage. The patriarch of the Nclane family managed to defend himself and dodge backward. However, to his misfortune, he realized he was cornered and had no more room to retreat. At that moment, Logan arrived, fully powered up and ready to protect his father. One of the intermediate-ranked soldiers could only look to the side and see Logan, extremely furious, approaching. The young man blocked the attack that was about to strike his father and immediately stepped forward to take over the fight. With that burst of energy, a strong gust of wind spread across the area, and Patrick found himself wondering what had just happened. As the dust settled, he recognized the figure standing before him. The young man, smiling, apologized to his father for arriving late. Finally, the patriarch recognized that it was Logan, his son. Still injured, the king felt relieved to see his son there. He thought he had seen Logan coming with an army of mercenaries from behind the enemy lines, but was certain they were far from where he was. Looking back, he wondered how Logan had made it through all the enemies at the rear and reached him. Patrick then realized that all the soldiers who had been battling before were now defeated by his son. He was about to ask the boy how he had become so strong, but recognizing the urgency of the situation, remarked that it didn't matter right now. He then asked if Logan's presence meant they now had the advantage. Logan, smiling, confirmed and stated that the Nclane family was close to winning the war. Patrick, putting aside his pride, approached his son, placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him that he had done an excellent job. The high-ranking knight witnessing this was incredulous, seeing that Logan had just fought off two intermediate-ranked knights simultaneously. He couldn't comprehend how a mere country boy of 20 years had done it with such ease. Filled with rage, he grew furious, summoning all his strength, thinking that it didn't matter. He would kill Logan right then and there. The knight ordered his allies to form up while Patrick and Logan prepared for the next battle. Patrick reflected that just from that one attack by Logan, he could tell that his son was strong enough to handle most intermediate-ranked knights. He also considered that if his son dealt with the intermediate knights while he fought the high-ranking one, their chances of victory were high. However, Logan stepped in front of his father, requesting to face the high-ranking knight himself. The boy's father tried to warn him that the man was too strong and that despite Logan's progress, he was still only an intermediate warrior. Suddenly, Logan lightly touched his father's wound, causing the man to groan in pain. Logan told him that in his current state, even he could defeat Patrick, so he asked for his father's trust, saying he would handle everything. Seeing his son so determined, Patrick sighed and then agreed, stepping back to defend his son and urging him to be careful. Logan, noticing his father's trust in him, sighed in relief. Excited, Logan urged his father to hurry, and the two of them charged toward their enemies. The high-ranking knight couldn't understand why Logan was approaching him with such confidence, given that he was a knight of much higher rank. Deeply irritated by this, the knight gripped his sword tightly, channeling as much power as he could. He questioned how Logan could have such confidence, but the boy simply advanced toward his enemy. As Logan wielded his strength, he tried to devise a plan to take down his powerful opponent. Sword in hand, he leaped toward his enemy, ready to strike. Logan's weapon collided with the high-ranking knight's, producing a resounding crash that could be heard far and wide. Recognizing the strength of his opponent, the high-ranking knight was startled, while Logan remained calm. The man quickly backed away, creating some distance to prepare himself. He was still in disbelief because despite his injuries, he couldn't feel any significant power coming from Logan. And yet, he was being overpowered by this boy. This could only mean one thing. Logan was giving everything he had to defeat him. Determined to end the battle, the knight charged at Logan, intent on finishing the young man. As he prepared, the knight demanded that Logan die, immediately launching an attack. Our protagonist remained calm, merely preparing to defend against the strike. A fierce sword duel ensued, the only thing visible being the clash of their blades. The two appear to be evenly matched. However, due to his previous fight with Patrick, the knight was already injured and began to feel the pain from his wounds. Seeing an opening in his opponent's defense, Logan struck, slashing the knight's chest. The man groaned in pain, his accumulated injuries weighing on him. Not wanting to be counterattacked, Logan quickly retreated to create distance. The high-ranking knight realized that his opponent left no opening, meaning he needed a chance to strike back. Suddenly, the knight smiled maliciously, noticing something. Looking at Logan, the knight declared that he had an idea. Logan, who was focused on eliminating his enemy, noticed that the strength of his sword was being drained. He quickly realized that the warrior's weapon was responsible for this absorption. The high-ranking knight believed Logan had fallen into his trap. He planted his feet firmly and gripped his sword tightly. Then, pulling his sword back, he dragged Logan's strength along with it. As Logan was pulled forward, he lost his balance, stumbling unprepared toward his opponent. Seeing that he had broken Logan's balance, the knight began to celebrate, certain of his victory. He knew that Logan had lost his center of gravity, meaning he wouldn't be able to react to any attack, and this was the perfect moment. With that, the knight moved to strike Logan. However, when he swung his sword, the only thing he hit was a piece of Logan's clothing. Confused, the knight looked behind him and saw something terrifying. He realized that Logan had dodged at such speed that he hadn't even seen it happen. Standing behind his opponent, Logan merely observed the pathetic warrior. Finally, the knight understood. It wasn't that Logan was fast, but that he himself was too slow. Logan began to activate the power of the Divine Sword's secret, causing his blade to be further imbued with aura. The Viscount Haymon's soldier realized he was going to die and thought to himself that he needed to flee immediately. But it was too late. Logan activated the first form of the Divine Sword's secret. He unleashed an attack called Cutting Wave, bringing his sword down toward the ground and releasing a massive wave of energy. All the knight could see was a bright light illuminating his face. And then the wave of energy hit, burning the poor man. The power of the attack was visible to Patrick and even Ronian, who was far away. In fact, the energy released by the strike was so great that everyone on the battlefield could see it. Afterward, Logan simply sighed and spat on the ground in the direction of his fallen enemy. It was revealed that his attack had left a trail of destruction for several meters. Looking at the defeated knight, Logan muttered, questioning how the man could have used such cheap tricks. Logan then raised his sword high and, declaring his name, announced that he had killed the enemy general. All of his allies and enemies watched in disbelief. The Viscount's soldiers, realizing that their highest-ranking knight had fallen, were thrown into despair. Looking in Haymon's direction, everyone noticed that the Viscount had likely fled. One of the soldiers dropped his sword, and his comrade asked what he was doing. The soldier replied that they should at least save themselves by surrendering. Other soldiers quickly realized this was the best idea and agreed. Thus, the entire army of the Viscount surrendered to the McLean family. Rick, Logan's subordinate, began shouting that everyone should praise their master. Crying, the man kept repeating the words, overwhelmed with emotion for having been saved. The allied soldiers of the McLean family began to echo the same phrase, celebrating their victory with joy. And so everyone celebrated the end of the battle and the victory of the McLean family. That night, a horse could be seen galloping swiftly. Haymon, riding desperately, questioned in his mind where everything had gone wrong, as he had prepared for 3 long years for this battle. He thought about how he had even sought the help of other nobles and gathered 100 knights. The man blamed everything on that cursed redhead Logan, believing that his cavalry and their weapons had ruined everything. As he imagined the face of our protagonist, Haymon grew increasingly infuriated by his defeat. He thought that his only option was to return quickly to his territory, as it was the only way to survive. Soon, the Viscount arrived at the gates of an enormous wall, guarded by 2 soldiers. The overweight man hastily dismounted from his horse, panicking and desperate. Tessera demanded that his soldiers open the gate immediately, as their lord had returned. However, one of his subordinates noticed something in the distance. The warrior informed his lord that something was approaching on the horizon. Everyone then saw that Logan's cavalry was pursuing the Viscount. Realizing this, Haymon panicked, not knowing what else to do. Our protagonist dismounted his horse, commenting that the Viscount had been quick to flee. The entire mercenary cavalry stopped in front of the fortress walls. Logan informed the soldiers guarding the wall that Tessera had been defeated. He ordered the warriors to open the gates and receive the new true victor. Some of the archers on top of the wall defending the castle wondered if this was really true. However, the general in command ordered his soldiers not to cower before the enemy's words. Seeing that words alone wouldn't be enough, Logan made a decision and drew his sword. As he heard the enemy's threats, the young man began preparing, using his power. The 2 spearmen standing before the gate wondered what the boy was doing. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, Logan vanished from sight. The soldier guarding the gate didn't understand what was happening, and when he looked up, he saw something shocking. He saw Logan leaping between the walls, climbing to the top of the fortress. Once there, the young man placed his sword at the general's neck and ordered him to open the gate unless he wanted to die. Inside Tessera's mansion, all the doors were open and an eerie silence spread throughout the place. A butler, a servant of the Viscount, was merely watching his master, who seemed to be frantically doing something. For some reason, Haymon was rummaging through several treasure chests. Desperate, the man thought he should at least take some gold coins with him to live elsewhere. However, he suddenly heard a voice, and Logan declared that he had finally found his opponent. Desperate, Tessera turned around and questioned how the boy had arrived there. Logan explained that Haymon's servants had given him up before he even had to threaten them. With a terrifying expression, the boy remarked that this said a lot about Tessera's reputation as the lord of the fiefdom. The Viscount remained frantic, and the butler, realizing the situation, quickly fled. At that moment, Tessera grew furious, wondering how his servants dared to betray him. Our protagonist began walking toward the man, who continued to plead for his life and surrender. The blonde Viscount offered to compensate the boy with any reparations and would leave according to the conventions of feudal wars, asking only for his life to be spared. However, the redhead merely mocked this and continued advancing toward Haymon. Logan stated that the man had no right to speak of tradition, as he had declared war out of nowhere and surrendered in less than a day. As he approached, McLean looked down at the terrified, desperate Viscount. Speaking Haymon Tessera's name, the boy asked if the lord had any conscience at all. As a last resort, Haymon claimed that Logan should uphold the nobility's honor, as prisoners captured in feudal wars were spared according to the conventions. Surprisingly, the boy agreed, stating that he would respect the honor and customs of his house and spare the blonde's life, giving him time to gather some of his wealth and leave. Thinking he had been spared, the Viscount thanked him, but Logan responded that he would only say that if he were his father. Logan explained that Patrick was a man of honor, so much so that he would accept his surrender without any conditions. The young man was about to draw his sword, but when he looked to the side, he noticed a beautiful crystal dagger in the treasure chest that Tesserin had been rummaging through. The boy picked up the object and began admiring the beautiful weapon. Haman, desperate, pleaded with Logan to take the dagger, informing him that it was crafted by one of the finest artisans in the world. While examining the weapon, the young man thanked him but declined. Immediately after, Logan suggested that it would be better for the Viscount to take the weapon with him. With a smile on his face, the boy appeared gentle. However, with extreme cruelty, he plunged the dagger into his enemy's chest. Haman groaned in pain, reminding Logan that he had said he would spare his life, but the boy coldly responded that he would have spared him if he were Patrick. As he continued to drive the dagger deeper into his opponent's chest, Logan coldly stated that he was not his father. The only thing the Viscount could mutter was about the honor among nobles, but our protagonist silenced him. Logan asked if Haman knew how many people had died because of his greed. Finally, with a terrifying expression, one that we had never seen before, Logan demanded that the man end his wretched life here and now. With brutal cruelty, the redhead finished off his opponent, giving him no chance to resist. The young man then stood over his enemy's lifeless body. He thought to himself that thankfully the man had died quickly and without much struggle. Logan spent a moment looking at the ketchup-like substance on his hands, reflecting for a brief time. However, closing his fist and placing it over his chest, the young man felt relieved to have finally overcome the crisis. He stood up, acknowledging that he still needed to finalize things there. After that, McLean prepared to shout for everyone in the house to hear. He announced that Viscount Haman Tesserin had taken his own life. After taking care of a few tasks, he thought that should be enough. Suddenly, Kazolan entered the room calling for his master. Logan asked what his subordinate wanted, and Kai requested that Logan see something in the castle's underground prison. Logan agreed and followed his ally to the castle's dungeon. What they discovered in that prison wasn't revealed, and the scene shifted to a few days later. In Haman's castle, Patrick, having arrived after his recovery, asked his son what had happened. He questioned Logan directly, asking if Tesserin had really taken his own life. The redhead confirmed his father's question, lying that the Viscount had probably been driven to despair. Unexpectedly, Logan's plan fell apart, and his father asked if the boy had actually killed Haman. Patrick kept staring at his son, waiting for him to reveal the truth. With a sigh of resignation, Logan admitted that he had deliberately killed his opponent. The young man explained that he didn't want the Tesserin bloodline to survive and potentially cause more problems in the future. His father remained silent for a moment, but then assured him that it was fine since Logan was an adult and must have had his reasons. Looking at Patrick, Logan thought that his father had truly changed, almost seeming like a new person. The patriarch then told his son that no matter what anyone said, he had performed the best in that battle. And still filled with pride, Patrick whispered his thanks to Logan. Realizing that his father had completely changed, Logan could only respond with a gentle smile. Immediately afterward, the patriarch of the McLean family turned to his son, declaring that he would make Logan the official heir to their house. Logan seemed extremely flattered, and his father reassured him again that he deserved it. As it seemed Logan was about to accept the offer, for some reason, he apologized and said he had to refuse. Hearing this, his father grew irritated and asked if Logan was truly rejecting the offer to be the successor of the McLean family. Patrick questioned the reason, wondering if Logan was worried about his reputation, and said that if that were the case, his deeds in the battle were enough to change it. Logan explained that this wasn't the reason, but rather that for the McLeans, a family of knights, Ronian was more suited for the position. Patrick remained silent for a moment, listening as his son explained that Ronian had become a Force user at only 14, 5 years younger than he had been. Logan also reminded his father that it was impossible to predict what feats Ronian might achieve by the time he reached adulthood. Patrick then countered, saying that even if what Logan said was true, martial skill alone did make someone fit to be a lord. Hearing this, our protagonist thought that such reasoning was based on the common understanding of that era. However, the young man recalled that if Ronian were to earn the title of the youngest Force user on the continent, as he had in his previous life, there would be no issue. Logan also thought to himself that there was no benefit in becoming the successor, as he didn't want to waste time training to be the next Baron. Logan responded that as the older brother, he wanted to give his younger brother a chance. For that reason, he hoped Patrick would wait until Ronian reached adulthood before deciding on the successor. Patrick sighed, admitting that he never thought his son cared so much about his own brother. The man agreed to Logan's request, stating that he would delay the decision on the heir for 5 years until Ronian became an adult. He also mentioned that he still wanted to reward Logan, and that they needed to return home to settle some of the remaining matters from the war. Logan, with a cheeky grin, asked if he could pick something of interest as his reward. Later, we see the McLean Knights arriving in the city, greeted by cheers from a festive crowd. Some civilians were discussing how incredible it was that they had returned after only a week of war, and one man remarked that he had heard the war had actually ended in just 1 day. A farmer questioned how that was possible, wondering if the kingdom's knights were always that strong, and his friend asked if he hadn't heard the rumors. The friend explained that the rumors credited the victory to the first young master, Logan. He added that, according to the soldiers who returned first, Logan's mercenaries had turned the tide of the battle. Finally, the young man mentioned that the mercenaries annihilated the enemy army with some mysterious weapon, and Logan even defeated a high-ranking knight on his own. A girl nearby overheard the conversation and asked if the first young master was really as amazing as they were saying. The civilians began to speculate that Logan must have had a reason for purchasing all those monsters in the past. With a great sense of pride, the four farmers looked in Logan's direction, stating that prodigies were truly on another level. Listening to all of this was our protagonist, who felt extremely uncomfortable and embarrassed. Behind him, his brother Ronian asked how Logan felt now that everyone was praising him. Logan replied that it was all making him blush. Ronian suggested that since everyone was happy to see him, Logan should at least give them a smile. Logan, considering the idea, wondered if that was really the right thing to do. But seeing all the people looking at him with pride despite his embarrassment, he couldn't resist. Logan gave a completely awkward smile and made a thumbs-up gesture to the crowd. Those who had previously looked at Logan with pride were now visibly shocked. Ronian asked what kind of smile that was, pointing out that everyone was now scared of Logan. Patrick, observing his son, smiled gently at him. He then announced to the crowd that everyone should welcome the great champion of the war. The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting the name of young master Logan. Later, in the McLean family's castle, things had quieted down. As Logan walked through the halls, he thought to himself that the welcome ceremony had lasted too long, and the soldiers had impressive stamina to endure it after the war. Suddenly, someone startled Logan, asking what he was planning. It was Ronian's mother, who had appeared behind the redhead. The woman said she had heard everything about Logan rejecting the chance to become the successor, but unlike everyone else, she didn't believe him. She questioned what on earth the boy was plotting. Ronian tried to apologize to his brother, explaining that the issue with the Kairos family had left his mother in this state. Logan turned and reassured his brother that it was fine, then looked at Marianne. He thought that despite their long-standing resentment, Marianne had lost all her real power because the Kairos family had betrayed her, so she was no longer a threat. Logan realized that if he handled things now, Marianne might accept his sincere apology. Logan admitted that he was aware his actions over the past months had not been very trustworthy, and he was also regretful, as everything he had done had been driven by jealousy and feelings of inferiority. Hearing this, Marianne told her son that she had been right all along and that Logan had just admitted that everything was his fault. Ronian tried to apologize again, but Logan asked his brother to simply listen because it was he, Ronian, who truly deserved the apology. Ronian was utterly confused and asked what his brother was talking about. Logan explained that he had been apologizing since he returned, but never explained why. He admitted that the regrets and cowardly nature he had built up over the years were not easy to overcome, which is why it took him so long to apologize. Logan stated that Ronian probably already knew, but he wanted to say it himself, and with extreme honesty, he admitted that for the past few years he had hated his own brother. Hearing this, Ronian felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled, leaving him completely in shock. He said nothing, and even Marianne couldn't find words. Our protagonist continued, confessing that he had masked his own incompetence by hating his brother, but now he genuinely regretted those pathetic years of his life. So he wanted to officially apologize to his brother. Putting aside all his pride, Logan finally said, "I'm sorry." For some reason, Ronian remained silent, looking at him with a hint of disdain. Logan thought that his good deeds wouldn't erase the bad ones and realized how naive he had been. However, with a glimmer of hope in his eyes, Ronian said it was all right. Logan, still in shock, listened as his brother explained that he had always believed that if he remained kind to Logan, even when he was cold, the brother he knew would return one day. Showing genuine forgiveness, Ronian gave a gentle smile. Logan could only think that he had hesitated for so long to do something so simple, and it was ridiculous on his part. Once again, Logan turned to Marianne and reassured her that he genuinely cared for Ronian and sincerely wanted him to become the successor. He acknowledged that asking for her immediate trust was a lot, so all he wanted was for her to keep watching him. He wanted Marianne to observe everything he did from that point forward to prove his sincerity. Marianne felt touched but said nothing, and Logan silently observed her reaction. Under the moonlight, Logan thought that for now, this was enough. The next day in the forest, we see Logan walking alongside Hamar. The dwarf asked his master where they were headed after returning from the war, and Logan replied that Hamar had rested enough, it was time to get back to work. Hamar in turn said he was curious about how his master would push him to his limits this time. Logan reassured the dwarf not to worry, promising that he would definitely enjoy the new task. Hamar, hearing this, could only think that his master didn't really know what he liked. After walking for a while, they finally arrived at a location, and Logan declared that from that day forward, they would develop the mountain. Hamar, looking at the enormous mountain, was impressed. We then flash back to the moment when Logan was making a request to his father, asking to develop a mountain. Patrick questioned if Logan was referring to the mountain near the border with Tesserin, and Logan confirmed it. Patrick pointed out that, although it was called a mountain, it was a desolate place with nothing around it. He wondered why his son wanted it. Logan simply responded that he had no specific reason, but he imagined there might be some mineral buried in that barren land. The narrator explains that the reason for Tesseron's war was revealed a year after the battle. Tesseron had begun exporting gold from a hill in an unclaimed territory that they had seized. The gold from this mine alone made Tesseron much more influential, but this ended when, in the future, Ronion massacred the Tesseron family in revenge. A little earlier, during the conversation between Patrick and Logan, we see Kaisolun walking through the underground prison of Tesseron's fortress with his master. The mercenary informed Logan that there were some peculiar things his master should take a look at. Logan inspected his cell and noticed something surprising. Suddenly, an elderly man who was in prison there shouted that they hadn't done anything wrong. The man claimed that they had only brought the gold from the mine as they had been contracted to do, but the cruel Viscount had imprisoned them. McLean, growing extremely irritated, placed his hand over his face. He expressed disbelief that Hammond had locked up 5 specialists from such a valuable mine. With an extremely unsettling expression, Logan could only think that this was an unexpected profit. The elderly man, still scared, became even more terrified, unable to comprehend what the boy intended. Back in the present, Logan reflects that they won the feudal war against Tesseron, but it was only a small wave they had overcome. The real challenge lies ahead, impending invasion by the Empire, which would lead to the nation's collapse. The event that will occur in a year will mark the beginning of the kingdom's downfall, the sudden death of the current king, Samuel von Grandia. The king's death triggered a succession crisis among the 3 princes, sparking a 3-year civil war that drastically weakened the kingdom's forces. Before the kingdom could recover, the Empire's invasion began. That was the first event that led to the kingdom's eventual fall. Logan realizes that since the McLean family doesn't belong to any specific faction, remaining neutral would leave them as mere spectators. However, Logan also sees this as an opportunity, one he cannot let slip by. He vows to use the chaos to reclaim the old territories of the county and become the Lord of the Southwest once again. And if possible, he also intends to end the Civil War. Suddenly, a voice pulls him out of his thoughts, snapping him back to reality. Halmar asks what his master was thinking since he hadn't responded yet. Beside the dwarf were the people who had been imprisoned by Viscount Tesseron. Our protagonist contemplates that, given the tragic future, he needs to gather power as quickly as possible, but doing so too suddenly might make him appear mad. Thus, whatever he does, he'll have to finance it with his own money. Looking at the mountain, Logan remarks that this hill will become his cash cow to fund his reinforcements. He then announces to everyone that there's gold in that mountain, and that he plans to mine it. Finally, Logan asks for an estimate of the cost, leaving everyone around him in disbelief. Halmar, thinking it was another one of his master's ridiculous requests, felt disappointed. The elder who had been in prison comments that Tesseron had been paying them well, so he agreed instantly, but mining for gold was insane. He then asks if Logan is truly certain that there is gold in the mountain, to which the young man confidently replies that he is. The old man, still confused, questions how Logan knows this, and the boy flatly states that he saw it. Baffled, the elder can only think that Logan sounds like a lunatic. Logan, continuing with his plan, says that this is a secret operation and that only the 6 of them will carry out the excavation. The old man panics, responding that just the 6 of them couldn't possibly handle such a task, and he wonders aloud if Logan has lost his mind. Looking at Hamar for agreement, the elder hopes the dwarf will back him up. However, Hamar simply replies that the only option is to do the job or prepare to die. Resigned, the dwarf tells the elder to accept his fate, start sleeping less, and forget about living like a normal human. Logan, internally pleased by Hamar's work ethic, asks the elder how much money would be needed. The elder responds that they need to drill to get an estimate of the gold deposits, but the initial investment alone would require 5 million in gold. Halmar adds that safely developing the mine will take a long time, and the preparations alone will take 6 months. Logan reflects that, as he expected, it will require a lot of time and money, but the mine is essential, and he's determined to develop it at any cost. He starts thinking that if he could sell the monster meat, it would accelerate the process greatly, but the neutralizing effects won't be ready for another 6 months. Disheartened, he laments that he could invest in the mine if only he could sell the meat. Suddenly, an idea strikes him. He doesn't need to wait. By leveraging the meat's toxic properties, he could turn it into medicine right away. Logan comments that he used neutralizing agents many times as a mercenary, so he could make them too. If this plan works, it would be revolutionary. A week later, in South Village of McLean, someone announces that something is ready. Rip points to the barrels and says that the dubious medicine is prepared and ground up, while Logan inspects them. Logan corrects Rick, telling him to stop calling it dubious and refer to it as a neutralizing agent instead. Logan then asks where the monster meat is, and his vassal replies that it's stored in the village warehouse, just as his master had requested. Logan, seeing that his plan had worked perfectly, thought to himself that everything was a success, and he was very pleased. He asked Dwayne to give him his hand, and though still panting, Dwayne complied. Dwayne knelt before Logan and with an emotional expression bowed deeply to his young master. Our protagonist, looking down at his subordinate with confidence, stood silently, while Rick remained confused about the whole situation. Logan handed Dwayne a box, and the narrator explained that after the first successful test, the men began to bow before Logan, and the experiments continued. In Lovin's room, he remarked that he had heard Hankel had been arguing with his wives every day. The man, embarrassed, asked who had spread those rumors. Before Hankel could respond, Lovin shoved a pill into his subordinate's mouth. After swallowing it, Hankel began to feel like his entire body was on fire. Before he could express his gratitude, Lovin urged him to go to his wife. Lovin then said he was going to talk to his father, and all Hankel could do was thank him. After that, Hankel commented that he was off to fulfill his mission. The third and final experiment was with Patrick. Despite feeling embarrassed, he admitted to his son that the pill was extremely effective. As Lovin walked through the mansion's corridors, he thought to himself, apologizing to Ronian for the fact that they might soon have another sibling. At that moment, Rick caught up to Logan. Rick questioned why his master hadn't asked him to test the pill, considering that he had been the one doing most of the hard work. Lovin looked Rick up and down and remained silent for a moment. Then, without a word, Lovin left the room, leaving Rick confused about what he had meant. With a cruel tone, Logan remarked that it wasn't like Rick had anyone to use it with. Rick, frustrated, demanded to know what Logan was implying, but Logan dismissed him, telling him not to follow as he stank. In a crystal ball, someone was speaking, saying that they understood everything, and that if the remedy was as effective as claimed, there would definitely be high demand. However, they wanted to know the price, and it was revealed that Logan was speaking with this person. Logan responded that it would cost 100 gold for one pill and 1,000 for a kit. The person Logan was speaking to was Philip, and he noted that the nobles of the capital wouldn't swallow such a product easily. Logan acknowledged that it would be a hard sell, but he was confident in what he was offering. He recalled that in his past life, this product had sold very well. Logan told Philip that if they released it in limited quantities, it would sell at an even higher price, and Philip agreed. Our protagonist also mentioned that if a well-known figure tried the product and gave a testimony, it would yield tremendous results. Philip retorted that no noble would ever announce that their impotence had been cured by taking a pill. Logan replied that it didn't need to be publicly announced. Many people spy on the nobles, and even if a rumor spread, that would be enough. Philip then suggested that Logan attend a party in the capital. Logan, confused, asked why he would need to attend a party, saying he had no reason to go. He thought to himself that the only party he had ever attended was the one thrown by the mercenaries after winning the battle, as his family never had the money for such events. Philip explained that parties were good for making connections, but it would take time to help with business, and it wasn't like he could sell the product at the party. However, Logan misunderstood and thought he should sell the product there. The merchant tried to convince his master that selling such a product at a party would make them claimed family outcasts in high society. Logan, deep in thought, came up with an idea and told Philip he would inform him about an informant in the capital. Philip was baffled by this, but Logan simply said that he would be heading to Grand soon and would share the details then. Philip, though deeply reluctant, sensed something was off and had a bad feeling about the whole situation. A week later, someone was seen dismounting from a horse, declaring that they had finally arrived. Logan had arrived in the capital of the kingdom, Gran, and Philip was there to greet him. The merchant asked how his master had gotten his family's permission, as it seemed strange for a noble to come to the capital to sell aphrodisiac products. Logan replied that his family would never have allowed it, so he told them something else. It was probably because of his accomplishments during the war that they let him go. Logan also added that despite everything, bringing 3,000 boxes without a servant had been a bit of a problem. Logan reflected on how easily his father had let him travel to the capital, much more easily than he had expected. Philip reminded him that the first time they met, Logan hadn't had any servants either and questioned whether it was appropriate for a noble to travel alone. Logan replied that having a servant would only make it harder to move around freely, and besides, Rick had his own work to do. He thought to himself that he had already given Rick a massive task to handle, and his subordinate had enough problems as it was. Thinking about Rick, Logan began to reflect on memories from his past life. He recalled how, in both his previous life and this one, Rick had done everything for him. No matter what happened, Rick was always by his side. Though he didn't say it aloud, Logan in his heart felt a deep sense of gratitude toward his loyal subordinate. Returning to the present, Logan declared to Philip that he had made a decision. To honor all the hard work Rick had put into developing the pills, they would call the product Impo Rick. Philip, hearing this, couldn't help but mutter that Logan truly was a lunatic. At that moment, Logan and Philip continued their conversation, with Philip suggesting they rest at a bar after the long trip. However, Logan declined, noting that it wouldn't be wise to discuss sensitive matters in such a public place with so many ears around. Philip agreed and changed the subject, informing Logan that he had spoken to the informant to gather the information his master had requested. He asked if Logan was sure about paying the informant 900 gold coins for each document. Logan responded that while the informant was expensive, he was also highly skilled. As long as Philip had made the request correctly, they would get the perfect information. Philip confirmed that he had followed Logan's instructions exactly. The first request was for the names of prominent nobles who had been married for the last 10 years but had no children. The second was for the names of nobles who had not taken second wives or lovers. And finally, the third was for nobles who frequently sought out foods reputed to increase stamina. After hearing this, Logan nodded, affirming that Philip had indeed made the request correctly and had done a great job not only on this task, but on all the others as well. Philip humbly replied that it hadn't been too difficult, and that the real crisis had been when he heard about the war. He was relieved when the battle ended. Cutting the tension, Philip joked that he had been more worried about the situation because if Logan had died, he would have been stuck dealing with that huge pile of monster meat. Irritated, Logan tossed a piece of paper at Philip's face and told him to read it. Logan then asked which name on the list Philip thought would make the best first client for their product. Philip began analyzing all the options carefully before pointing to a specific name, declaring it the best choice. Logan, stepping closer and seeing the name Philip had chosen, was impressed as he recognized the man. In a grand ballroom, several nobles were celebrating lavishly. A blonde nobleman was surrounded by women, chatting with all of them. Logan entered the room and called out to the blonde man, addressing him as Count Davis. For some reason, the Count seemed confused upon seeing who had called his name. Logan introduced himself as the eldest son of the McLean family from the southwestern region. Seeing Logan's unusual clothing, the Count struggled to suppress a laugh and welcomed Logan. In his mind, Fallon Davis thought the redhead was incredibly tacky, while Logan merely thought that he had worn the clothes Philip recommended. Logan commented to himself that it was fine if no one liked the outfit, as he didn't have time for pointless connections at meaningless parties. His only target was Count Davis. The narrator explained that Fallon Davis, despite being an important figure in the kingdom's treasury and having been married for 20 years, was a man whose marriage had produced no children. Logan was shocked when Philip had pointed to the Count's name on the list, as in his past life, Davis had become quite infamous. Davis was the Count who had taken his own life after a dispute with his wife. The tragic event occurred due to an incident between the two, culminating in a public argument. During a party, his wife had dropped a bombshell, claiming that Davis was impotent, causing everyone at the event to focus on him. The humiliation from that moment had driven Davis to the brink, and eventually to his death by his own hand. Logan also reflected on how Fallon Davis' reputation had been so important to him that it had driven him to take his own life. The man was a perfect first client for Logan's business venture. After gathering his thoughts, Logan returned to the present and informed the Count that he had come to the capital for business, and upon hearing that Davis would be present at the party, wanted to greet him. Fallon responded that Gran already had everything they could possibly need, but he conceded that since Logan was from the outskirts, there might be some fascinating products from there that weren't available in the capital. Logan agreed, stating that the Count was right. He was confident that his products were not yet available in Grand, which is why he was bringing them to market. As Logan moved closer to his target, he whispered to Davis that the product was a specialized remedy for men. Getting close enough, Logan discreetly informed Davis that he was selling a stimulant for adult activities. Upon hearing this, Fallon was outraged. He shouted for everyone in the room to hear that he couldn't believe a noble's son was selling stimulants for adult activities. The women in the room became embarrassed, casting judgmental glances toward Logan. Meanwhile, Fallon thought to himself that this backwoods noble had no idea how things worked and was going to humiliate himself. Logan, anticipating this reaction, merely sighed. Undeterred, he approached Fallon again and, as a gesture of courtesy, offered a gift to someone as influential as the Count, asking him to accept it. He pulled out a small box and introduced the product as Imporic, a remedy that would be sold for 100 gold coins each. Logan explained that he had brought 3 of them as a special gift for Fallon Davis, emphasizing that it was an excellent remedy with no side effects. Hearing this, the Count was intrigued and couldn't resist the temptation. A few days later, the bell of a shop rang. A man with white hair introduced himself, stating that his lord had sent him to retrieve more of the Imporic remedy. Logan was pleased that Count Davis had sent someone and introduced himself to the man. After the transaction, Philip thanked the man for the purchase and they left. Philip returned inside and remarked that earning 10,000 gold for 10 boxes wasn't a bad start for their first sales. However, Logan replied that they needed to earn more than that, as the rent for their small shop alone cost 10,000 gold. Philip argued that having a storefront was strategically important because people gathering in front of the shop created more impact. Logan agreed, but then mentioned that he was heading to another party. Claude, irritated, pointed out that Logan had been attending parties nearly every day since arriving in Grand. Logan explained that having Count Davis as their first client wasn't enough. With a smile, he remarked that he needed to spread the word to as many people on their list as possible. A week later, the same servant who had previously visited the shop was on his way there again. The old man mused that he couldn't believe the Count had asked him to buy more of the remedy, given that no healthy food had ever worked for him in the past. As he approached the shop, the servant noticed a line of people waiting for the store to open. He was puzzled as to why the line was so long and realized he recognized some of the people in line. Among them were the Chamberlain of Viscount Talon and the servant of Count Hamel. Trying to hide, the servant thought that such a scene could create unnecessary rumors, so he planned to buy the remedy quickly and leave. However, Philip stepped out of the shop and apologized to the waiting customers. He explained that, unfortunately, they didn't have any stock ready for that day. The waiting customers were shocked. One of them tried to ask why, and Philip explained that Impo Rick had become incredibly popular, but they didn't have large-scale production, so sales were limited. Despite the scarcity, the customers continued to press for purchases, knowing that their masters would be furious if they couldn't get the remedy. Meanwhile, an older nobleman walking down the street spotted the crowd around Philip's shop and grew curious, instructing his subordinate to check out what was happening. Watching the scene from a hidden spot, Lovin thought to himself that by limiting the stock, they were encouraging customers to buy. Seeing crowds of people would also make other nobles curious. Amidst the crowd, Philip reiterated that their stock for the day was sold out and asked everyone to return the following day. The same pattern repeated over the next few days. After some sales, the stock would sell out, continuing to build up the buzz around the product. Every single day, the vassals of nobles kept trying to purchase the highly requested medicine for their masters. Inside the shop, Philip was telling Lovin how incredible it was that the stock was selling out so quickly every day. While organizing his money, Lovin remarked that he had never imagined there would be so many impotent nobles in this kingdom. He also mentioned that they had tripled the price since they first started, yet people were still willing to pay extra to buy it. Philip looked at his master with pride, and the redhead, noticing this, gave a mischievous smile. Suddenly, a loud noise from inside the shop could be heard by everyone on the street. While teasing his subordinate, Lovin praised Claude for doing a good job, telling him that starting next month he would receive 1% of the total sales profit. Upon hearing this, Claude began shouting in excitement, promising to give Lovin whatever he wanted, overwhelmed with happiness. Outside the shop, a blond man in a hood quietly observed the establishment. Inside a room, Lovin blurted out in surprise that he couldn't believe they would make at least 10 tons of gold a year. Realizing he had spoken too loudly, he quickly covered his mouth while continuing a conversation with someone via transmission. Whispering, Lovin asked the person on the other end if they were serious. Hamar, on the other side of the transmission, confirmed and mentioned that according to the miners, there was a high chance that gold nuggets were located in a deep stratum. Unable to hide his excitement, Lovin thought that even with a rough estimate, 10 tons of gold would equal 100 million gold coins. However, Hamar pointed out that mining costs were no joke and asked if Lovin had the funds to cover them. Lovin confidently replied that he did. With a proud expression, Lovin told the dwarf to wait as he would gather all the money and workers needed for the operation. The tired dwarf simply replied that he wished his master would go easier on him. Later that night, as Lovin walked through the city, he reflected on the initial investment cost to develop the mine, estimating it to be around 5 million gold coins. If Impo Rick kept selling at its current pace, he would make 4 million in a month, meaning he could have enough in 2 months. He also mentioned that he had some boxes of Impo Rick stored, so if he returned home and sent more supplies, he could begin developing the mine at the same time. As Lovin approached his shop, he sensed something strange, as if someone else was nearby, and noticed a figure standing in front of the establishment. His expression turned serious, and he quickly ran toward the shop, wondering if it could be a thief. Upon entering, Lovin looked around, but everything seemed empty, leaving him confused. He dismissed the idea that the thief had disappeared, as there was only one door, meaning the criminal was likely still inside. Suddenly, someone approached Lovin from behind, putting him on high alert. He attempted to strike the mysterious individual and demanded to know who they were. However, as Lovin attacked in the direction where he thought the thief was, he realized the person was no longer there. Lovin was baffled, as he was certain someone had been there, which deeply unsettled him. Suddenly, an overwhelming pressure fell upon his shoulders, leaving him in shock. Turning around, Lovin saw a mysterious hooded figure standing on the roof. Wasting no time, Lovin leaped toward the figure to attack them. As he advanced, he prepared to stab the supposed criminal with his sword. However, the hooded figure easily dodged the attack. The silent figure continued to watch Lovin from the rooftop. Lovin asked the intruder for their names, seeking answers, but the mysterious figure remained silent. In the blink of an eye, the figure disappeared before Logan's eyes. Frightened, Lovin realized there was no longer any trace of the thief anywhere, yet he was certain someone had been standing in front of him. He then noticed something strange in his hand that hadn't been there before, further confusing him. The next day, Philip asked his master if the thief who could use aura had really infiltrated the shop. The man replied that he was only speculating, but the mysterious person who appeared was at least an advanced force user. Logan also noted that it wasn't just someone of a high rank. This being was on a completely different level. Philip was utterly confused, as it didn't make sense for an aura user to commit a petty theft. After all, aura alone was enough to elevate a slave to a noble. Philip then asked Logan what the person had stolen, and Logan answered exactly what Philip was thinking. Logan pulled out a box and explained that this thief had only stolen 2 Impo Rick pills. Claude, hearing this, became even more puzzled. This thief clearly wasn't after money, meaning they must have taken the pills for personal use. Perplexed, Philip asked if there were impotent people among aura users, which for some reason shocked Logan. Logan asked if there were any aura users on the list of names they had, and Claude replied that there weren't, as the informant demanded a higher fee to provide that information. However, after thinking for a moment, Claude remembered that there was indeed an aura user in the capital who had no descendants. Outside, a nobleman was seen walking through the streets, quietly observing two children running by. For some reason, the man simply stared at the small children, remaining silent. Beside him, a woman asked what he was looking at, startling him. He replied that he was just enjoying the view, beginning to sweat. The woman, hearing his explanation, stayed quiet for a moment before commenting that her husband was looking at the children again. The man insisted that he was merely appreciating the scenery and that she shouldn't dwell on useless thoughts. However, for some reason, the woman began to cry. As he embraced her, he gently suggested they return home. The woman, while holding on to her husband, said that she was very happy to have met him. The blonde man responded that he too was very happy to have met her, hugging her tightly. At that moment, the narrator explained that this man was none other than the kingdom's best swordsman, Felix Esperanza. The deep sadness and regret in his heart began with an unjust injury he had suffered in his youth. It had been struck in his intimate parts during a fight. It had been an honorable injury for a knight sustained on the defense line. As a young man, he hadn't thought much of it, but in the future, it would be different. As he became lost in his thoughts, Felix reflected that holding the title of Duke and being known as the strongest in the nation was meaningless because he didn't have a child to inherit his legacy. In a flashback, Felix was shown talking with his beloved. She gently held his hand, expressing how much agony he must be in. She also said that if Felix allowed it, she wanted to stand by his side. Looking at the woman in tears, Esperanza thought about how he wished there was some way he could repay her for all the love she had showered upon him. Sometime later, while walking, one of his vassals told Felix that the family meeting was approaching and asked if he wasn't going to hurry. Felix responded that there was no point in rushing, as all that awaited him was more pressure to produce an heir. The vassal, speaking cautiously, mentioned that there had been talk recently about a highly effective remedy circulating in the capital. Skeptical, Felix asked if it was true, and his vassal replied that it was said to cure even physical injuries. Felix laughed, but the subordinate explained that many people were claiming it had great effects. Deeply embarrassed, Felix thought to himself that he had already tried it. He was the one who had stolen those pills. He also affirmed that despite his wife's tears, he didn't believe he had committed a crime by attempting to fix things. And yet, even after taking the remedy, nothing had happened. Felix then told Louis that they should take those rumors with a grain of salt, to which the vassal apologized. Filled with deep sadness, Felix muttered to himself that it was just another false rumor and that the remedy couldn't possibly cure something even Aura couldn't fix. In the end, with profound sorrow, Felix concluded that he should simply give up. In front of the gate where Felix stood, a guard explained that he had already informed Logan that it wasn't possible to meet with the master of the house without a prior appointment. Logan replied that this was why he only asked the guard to tell Felix his name. Logan, with a confident expression, affirmed that Felix would definitely want to meet him as soon as he heard his name. A little earlier, Claude had questioned whether Logan was really going to confront the master swordsman personally. When Logan confirmed, Claude protested, saying that he couldn't just approach one of the most important figures in the kingdom and accuse him of theft. He added that Logan must be going mad. Philip agreed, stating that Logan was just asking for trouble, and suggested that he should simply pretend not to know anything, as if things went wrong, they would be in serious trouble. Back in the present, Logan sat in a chair inside a mansion, thinking that while Philip was right, this was an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Suddenly, a door opened and a butler welcomed Logan into the room. He was then invited to follow the butler inside. As Logan walked slowly toward his target, he saw Felix standing with his back turned. Logan thought to himself that this was one of the most powerful individuals in the nation, and it was a golden opportunity to form a beneficial connection. Quickly, Logan bowed and introduced himself, explaining that he had come to meet the master swordsman. In his mind, Logan also noted that he had heard the swordsman was nearly 100 years old but looked remarkably young, thanks to the power of Aura. Hearing the name of Logan's family, Felix recalled that they were from the southern region and asked what had brought the eldest son of the McLean family all the way to the capital. Logan, knowing he couldn't mention the incident from the night before, replied that he had recently started a business in the capital and had brought a gift. He pulled out a box of medicine and explained that it was an impressive remedy for men, highly recommended by several nobles. Felix, playing dumb, observed silently. Logan realized that Felix's reaction was neutral, making it impossible to confirm whether he was the person from last night. It was time for the next move. Logan then remarked that such things were hardly necessary for someone like Felix. Therefore, he had prepared something more special, and at that, Felix's demeanor changed. Logan noticed the reaction and guessed that Impo Rick had not shown effects on Felix, as the initial indifference was because Impo Rick neutralizes the toxicity of monster meat to make it edible. However, that toxicity had no effect on the body of a superhuman like Felix. By collecting and concentrating the poison in the meat, Logan had made an extremely potent version, a special limited edition of Impo Rick designed specifically for the swordsman. Felix remained silent while Logan thought to himself that though it contained the concentrated effects of 50 Impo Rick pills in one, he was confident in its efficacy based on personal experience. Logan offered the pill to Felix, suggesting that if he tried it and was satisfied, he could contact Logan personally, as he was willing to supply as much as Felix needed. However, Logan emphasized that it would have to remain strictly confidential. Felix took the box and thought about it for a moment. The next day, Felix, with a surprisingly pleasant expression, asked Logan what he desired, stating that if it were within his power, he would grant it. Internally, Logan was celebrating, but outwardly, he feigned innocence and asked what the swordsman meant. In his mind, Logan reflected that aura users mastered both life and body energy, and Felix had likely sensed the true potency of the remedy. Meanwhile, Felix was thinking that if the effects of the remedy accumulated 30 doses could potentially regenerate what he had lost, resolving his deep regret. Looking at Logan, Felix thought to himself that not only had the boy refrained from mentioning his error, but he had also brought a thoughtful gift showing great consideration. Furthermore, the swordsmanship Felix had witnessed from Logan the other day was incredibly advanced for someone so young. Logan was truly a talent worthy of possessing such a miraculous remedy. Felix began to laugh and told Logan that he was impressed. The swordsman explained that the gift Logan had given him the day before had shown the possibility of curing a long-standing pain, and for that, he wanted to reward the redhead. With brazen confidence, Logan casually requested a useless swordsmanship book that Felix no longer needed. Later in the library, Felix searched for the book that Logan had asked for. He selected one and handed it to Logan, stating that the boy could have it. The blonde swordsman Felix remarked that training with the book alone might harm Logan's body, but the book contained unique points that were worth studying as a reference. Timidly, Logan asked if Felix could also write a certificate stating that he had personally gifted him the book, and Felix agreed. Behind his gentle expression, Logan knew he had gotten exactly what he wanted. He mused to himself that receiving only a swordsmanship book from the master swordsman was a bit disappointing, but his real objective lay elsewhere. Suddenly, Felix offered to personally teach Logan some sword techniques. Logan was taken aback, but Felix explained that he understood Logan was modest and didn't desire much, yet a low-grade swordsmanship book didn't seem enough. Logan thought to himself that even though he had the secret of the divine sword, there was no reason to refuse such an offer, so he quickly accepted. In the training grounds, Felix told Logan that one of the joys of being older was nurturing the talent of a promising youth. As Felix drew his sword, he warned Logan to stay focused because he wasn't a merciful teacher. Logan readied himself for battle, placing his hand on his sword. However, Felix's overwhelming presence made Logan feel as though a heavy weight was pressing down on him. The master swordsman commanded Logan to draw his weapon. Logan struggled, feeling completely unbalanced under the crushing aura that was weighing down his entire body. He admitted to himself that he could hardly even hold a sword in that state and realized this was the power of aura. Confused, Logan wondered if all aura users were capable of this, as it seemed to bind the body with sheer presence. However, he dismissed the idea, reasoning that if this were common, wars across the continent would have been decided by aura users alone. After thinking for a moment, Logan hypothesized that this was not just pure presence, but a special technique. In response, Logan activated his core, which emitted an intense glow, surprising even Felix. Logan amplified his senses and analyzed the force that was restricting his movements. He realized that each time he attempted to move, Felix's aura stimulated the starting point of his motion, dispersing the force he was about to use. Though Logan didn't fully understand how, he knew there was a way to counter it. The solution Logan realized was to move 1 millisecond faster than the time it took for the force to disperse. Then, with swift precision, he slashed with his sword. Watching closely, Felix calmly remarked that his assumption had been correct. Logan truly had talent. Sweating from the effort, Logan wiped his brow. Felix then planted his sword in the ground and instructed Logan to pay close attention. Suddenly, Felix concentrated a red energy at the tip of his blade. With that movement, Logan noticed that the force restricting him was converging at the tip of the sword. Feeling the intense power, Logan guessed that this was the aura blade. But then, realizing the sheer magnitude of the force, he corrected himself. This wasn't just an aura blade. As Felix charged his next attack, he asked Logan to withstand it. All Logan could do was stare at the massive, powerful technique in front of him. Realizing what was coming, Logan understood that this was the gravity sword technique. As the attack approached slowly, Logan found himself unable to move, restrained by an invisible force. The energy from Felix's sword disturbed Logan's senses, penetrating his body, while the red blade intensified its momentum. Logan questioned what he could do, even though he now understood the principle behind the technique. Then an answer came to him. His aura was neutralizing the momentum of Felix's sword. Logan shifted his focus to the gravity sword and instinctively knew that the attack was inevitable. In response, Logan expanded his own aura, causing everything around him to glow. Felix observed this, realizing that Logan was using his aura to counter the gravity sword. As Felix prepared to unleash the full force of his attack, he advanced mercilessly toward Logan with quick footwork. Logan tried to shield himself using his aura, creating an invisible protective barrier. Finally, Felix, the kingdom's greatest swordsman, executed his attack, launching Logan across the room. Logan was thrown violently, his back crashing into the wall as Felix watched him intently from a distance. Struggling to get back on his feet, Logan trembled from the impact of Felix's powerful strike. Almost fainting, Logan began to reflect on the gravity sword technique and started to understand its mechanics better. However, Felix, dismissing Logan's hopes, told him that it wasn't something he could simply copy and execute. Despite that, Logan insisted that he might be able to replicate it, having witnessed the attack up close. Moments later, Logan collapsed on the ground, and seeing this, Esperanza apologized, admitting that he had unknowingly used too much strength in the strike. He also remarked that Logan was truly exceptional to have withstood such a blow. As he observed the unconscious Logan, Felix commented that watching his progress would be interesting. Sometime later, Felix's butler asked Logan if he was already leaving. The elderly butler conveyed that Esperanza had mentioned Logan could stay and rest comfortably until fully recovered. However, Logan replied that he was fine thanks to the potion he received from the Duke. The butler understood and escorted Logan to the main gate. As Logan departed, the butler wished him well on his journey, and Logan thanked him for the assistance. Once out of sight, Logan began running, his tough exterior fading away. It became clear that he was still in a lot of pain. He muttered to himself that he couldn't afford to waste the expensive potion from the Duke on mere injuries of this level. Logan added that thanks to the evolution of his aura, he could heal himself to a certain extent, though it was difficult to fully recover from the sword wound alone. Nevertheless, the potion he had received was incredible. As he inspected the vial, Logan noticed there was a note attached. The note contained the coordinates of the Duke's communication officer in case Logan needed to contact him. With a devious grin, Logan remarked that he hadn't expected Felix to treat him so well. It felt almost like he was being regarded as a true disciple, and Logan knew this connection would be of great value in the future. Suddenly, Philip startled Logan by calling out to him. Surprised to see his subordinate, Logan asked what Philip wanted, and the young man explained he had been waiting for him. Desperate, Claude asked if Logan had offended the master swordsman. Logan reassured him that everything was fine, and that he had even learned swordsmanship from Felix. However, in the middle of his explanation, Logan coughed out a bit of ketchup, alarming Philip. After a brief conversation, Logan finally recounted everything that had transpired inside the mansion. A week later, a sign appeared on Logan's shop, indicating that all of the Impo-Rick pills prepared for that day had sold out. Inside, Logan announced that the total revenue from the sales was around 4,100,000 gold coins. Philip confidently remarked that if sales continued like this, they could easily reach over 4.5 million gold coins per month. Both of them share the expressions of businessmen eager to squeeze every last bit of profit from their customers. Suddenly, a loud cheer echoed from the shop, audible throughout the city. Logan teasingly asked Philip if he was still happy, even without a performance bonus. Kneeling, Philip pleaded for his master not to disturb his imagination. Changing the subject, Philip informed Logan that he had organized the monster meat purchases in Kyle to proceed smoothly without needing constant supervision. Unexpectedly, Claude suggested that Logan should consider buying a house in the capital, as the costs of accommodations were becoming impractical. Logan disagreed, stating that he would stay for at most another year and a half, and that Philip should focus on making sales, as they would have to move to another location afterward. Philip suggested that they should streamline the business operations and questioned whether Logan was genuinely taking time to recover, since every time he visited, Logan was busy at his desk. Logan reflected that it was convenient that Philip wasn't overly curious, and despite all his complaints, respected his master's privacy. Finally, Claude asked if Logan would be returning to his estate, to which Logan replied affirmatively, instructing Philip to keep the customers calm. To Philip's surprise, Logan then requested that 1 million gold coins worth of food be sent to the castles of Tessern and McLean. Confused, Philip asked if Logan planned to feed the people of his estate by himself, and Logan merely told him to find a supplier. Claude commented that he hadn't realized his master cared so much about the people of his territory, while Logan privately mused that it was purely a matter of necessity. In his thoughts, Logan admitted that the chronic food shortages in McLean wouldn't be resolved until at least the next year. Logan also thought that even though he had obtained the records, food scarcity was still a serious issue in the territory. To ensure that people could work effectively, no one could go hungry. Before leaving, Logan mentioned that he had other matters to attend to. In a different location, several people appeared to be sick and starving. Everyone there seemed to be in a state of suffering, clearly battling illness and hunger. Inside, Logan handed a piece of paper to someone who questioned if Logan truly wanted him to find these people. The man explained that it would be difficult to track them down since Logan had only provided 1 or 2 physical characteristics, and their whereabouts were unknown. Ignoring the man's complaints, Logan asked if he could do it or not, reassuring him that if it was a matter of money, he would be paid appropriately. Reluctant but seeing no other choice, the man accepted the offer. As Logan walked through the corridors of the unknown location, he admitted that it would indeed be hard to find them, and perhaps the name he knew was only a nickname. But there was no other way. They needed to recruit the so-called superhumans. Logan recalled that those who had reached the realm of superhumans in his previous life did not belong to any specific faction, and they would be crucial in the upcoming battle against the Empire, especially the one who typically worked as a mercenary for the Empire. Suddenly, Logan stopped walking and questioned why he was rushing. Looking up at the sky, Logan told himself to slow down, as he still had time. Cutting to another scene, someone slammed their hand on a table, telling another person that they didn't have time. A messenger tried to call him his lord, but the man insisted that after using their disciples, they still needed more hands, and that was ridiculous. The messenger attempted to soothe his master, explaining that he was merely delivering a message. The lord then questioned the reason for summoning his disciple this time, but the man hesitated to explain. He revealed that he would be taking the disciple to the remote interior of the country, to the McLean territory, for a 6-month mission. With each word, the bearded man grew more furious. The bearded lord responded that things wouldn't work out if they continued this way. As he placed a hand on the messenger's shoulder, the man vowed to resolve the matter once and for all. For some reason, this man was deeply irritated and disturbed by something. In another part of Grand, a large magical tower loomed overhead. Logan arrived at the tower, where the receptionist was sleeping at the desk. Logan tried to wake him, and the startled young man jumped up. He quickly stood, welcoming Logan to the Earth Tower of the Kingdom of Grand. However, the brown-haired receptionist seemed puzzled, silently wondering about Logan's appearance. He thought Logan might be a noble, but his cheap attire didn't match. Logan then explained that he had come to buy some magical scrolls. Hearing this, the attendant confirmed his theory, assuming Logan was only there to buy some mediocre scrolls. Unaware of the attendant's thoughts, Logan continued, stating that he intended to purchase 150 collapsed magic scrolls. The receptionist was bewildered as Logan began to retrieve something from his coat. Logan placed a document on the desk, revealing his account verification issued by the Cooper's Bank. As the attendant counted the zeros, panic set in. He realized Logan had 7 million gold coins. The attendant's attitude immediately shifted, and he offered to escort Logan upstairs. At this point, the narrator explained that collapse magic is a fourth circle earth elemental spell, capable of collapsing a hill depending on the mage's strength. However, it has a long activation time, visible signs, and only affects soil and mud, making it better suited for construction than warfare. Some fiefdoms used it in wars, but it was most commonly used for accelerating mind development and addressing related issues. Just then, an old man appeared, asking if Logan was truly going to buy 150 collapsed scrolls. Logan confirmed it. The old man was thrilled, commenting that it had been a long time since they had such a generous customer. Logan had a brief flashback and thought he hadn't expected the master of the tower to personally greet him. Introducing himself, Logan explained his house and mentioned that it was a small fief. Radios, the tower master, acknowledged that it seemed his apprentice had made a mistake and apologized, assuring Logan that he would reprimand the young man. While listening to radios, the apprentice became extremely nervous, fearing he might be fired. The old master of the tower, in his thoughts, admitted that they had almost lost a valuable customer due to a mere apprentice's mistake. Radios reflected on how earth magic was mainly used for farming or construction these days, meaning that nobles rarely spent much on scrolls. He also knew that Logan was unaware of how under his leadership the tower had fallen into decline and he had overspent that month. Seeing an opportunity to make some money, Radios decided to handle the situation carefully, hoping to extract as much as possible. He then informed Logan that there was a problem. Logan, confused, asked what he meant. The old man explained that fourth circle scrolls required supervision to be produced, and they didn't have many mages of that level in the tower. With an irritated and serious expression, Logan asked what that had to do with him. Radios hadn't expected such a reaction, but continued trying to squeeze more money out of the situation. He began a speech about the high costs of producing these scrolls, but Logan cut him off, rising from his seat and saying that if that was the case, there was no point in continuing. Logan started to leave, stating that he had planned to purchase 150 scrolls every month, but if they couldn't even manage that amount, he would consider going to the Royal Tower instead. Desperate, Radios bowed deeply, begging Logan to wait. He asked if Logan was serious about buying that many scrolls every month, and Logan confirmed, explaining that he needed a total of 900 scrolls over the course of 6 months. Seeing this opportunity, the old master was overjoyed, but his happiness was short-lived when Logan pointed out that if they couldn't even provide 150 scrolls, it would be impossible to produce 600. Logan continued heading toward the exit, but the old man clung to his leg, promising they would manage to deliver the scrolls. Logan asked if that was truly possible, and the old man assured him that they would make it happen. In his mind, Radios calculated the costs. Fourth circle scrolls were worth 10,000 gold coins each. Producing 150 scrolls would be 1.5 million gold coins. Over 6 months, that would be 9 million coins. Overwhelmed by excitement, the old man, still on his knees, even began cleaning Logan's shoes, eager to seal the deal. He suggested that instead of buying only scrolls, Logan should consider hiring a mage directly. Logan thought to himself that proud mages usually preferred selling scrolls rather than doing dirty work, yet the old man was still suggesting this. Logan knew that a fourth circle mage could produce the equivalent of 300 scrolls per month, so he asked if such a mage could be hired. Radios clarified the misunderstanding, explaining that even he couldn't command a fourth circle mage so easily. Instead, he proposed sending 9 second circle mages and 1 third circle mage, who were his disciples and had worked together on various construction projects. The old master added that if Logan could reduce the number of scrolls a little, the deal would be even more feasible. Logan found the idea promising, knowing that mages were indeed more suitable for long-term construction projects. However, he found it odd that these so-called construction specialist mages were being offered so readily. The group of mages then appeared, and one introduced himself as Greek, a third circle mage. Logan was confused but introduced himself as well. Radios then dismissed the mages and they hurried away as if being mistreated. Logan remarked to Radios that they seemed extremely weak, but the old man insisted that despite appearances, they were his most experienced young talents. In his thoughts, Logan acknowledged that while they appeared capable, it was still strange that Radios would send them to a province, yet the proposal seemed advantageous. Logan told the old man that reducing the number of fourth circle scrolls in exchange for second circle mages didn't seem fair. With a mischievous grin, Logan proposed taking 120 collapsed scrolls along with 10 mages and would pay 1.5 million coins per month. Radios, though irritated, reluctantly agreed. Logan thought to himself that given the skills of the mages, the price was ridiculously low and such talents would typically not be sent for that amount. However, to his surprise, the old master promptly accepted and suggested they sign a contract on the spot. The boy couldn't believe that the master was agreeing to it so quickly and questioned when that contract had been made. He also thought it seemed suspicious, but at that moment, the bearded man appeared, claiming that he had heard everything and needed to speak with the tower's master. Some disciples tried to ask their lord to stop, but the man kept walking in a straight line. Logan noticed that this man was a fifth circle mage, and Clayton questioned the tower master if he was trying to send his disciples away. The old man said it was all for the good of the tower, and that no one worked as well as Clayton's disciples, but the bearded man didn't accept that. He commented that his students had just returned from a job, and despite hearing this, the tower mage had already decided to take those boys. Clayton said that since he reached the fifth circle last year and became an elder, he had noticed the old man's harassment, and hearing this, the elder grew irritated. Logan just watched the scene and soon deduced what was happening. He realized that Clayton had advanced to fifth circle at a relatively young age and had become an elder in an unusual way. The tower master felt threatened by this, but since he couldn't replace the elder, he kept harassing the other disciples unnecessarily. McLean told himself that the internal conflict within the tower could be an advantage for him and such a favorable contract would be perfect. Radios commented that if Clayton didn't like following the orders of the tower master, he and his disciples could leave, which made the man angry. Clayton, in his anger, began to summon an aura around his arms. The elder then questioned if the young man was trying to challenge him and also summoned magic into his hands. That power was strong enough to make the entire place tremble and leave everyone frightened. Clayton's disciples couldn't believe what was happening and tried to stop their masters. But the bearded man simply asked the tower master to prepare himself because they were going to fight, and the old man complied by conjuring his power. At that moment, Logan slammed his hand on the table. The two, who were about to face off, became confused and looked in McLean's direction. The young man, after signing that contract, made a malevolent expression and stated that the contract was established and there was nothing more to be done. After saying this, Logan asked the second circle mages to follow him. Then Clayton turned his attention to Clayton and Radios and said that they could do whatever they wanted because even if the tower master changed his mind, the contract would remain valid. Radios apologized for having done that in front of his client and told him that he would send the scrolls as soon as they were ready, but Clayton was not happy. The tower chief, knowing that Clayton was trying to force his conditions in a contract officially recognized by the Earth Tower, argued with him. Clayton, seeing that there was nothing else to be done, stated that he would go along with his disciples. Radios, irritated, questioned if the elder was saying he would follow his workers like a foreman, and Logan also grew upset because he couldn't afford Clayton. Clayton responded that he didn't intend to receive payment, he simply planned to help his disciples finish the job, and upon hearing this, Logan bowed before him. The man asked McLean to delay his departure by 1 day because his disciples needed to prepare before leaving, and the Lord readily agreed. The next day, a carriage could be seen moving through the streets. At the outer gate, waiting for his subordinates, was Logan, thinking that yesterday's contract was unexpectedly a stroke of luck as he had secured a fifth circle mage. He smiled because he could hardly wait to return to his property, and as soon as he returned, the first thing he would do was send Impo Rick to the shop. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to Lord Logan. The boy turned to see that it was Rena, and the woman in a carriage said she hadn't seen Logan in a long time. In a haughty manner, she asked the protagonist not to call her by her first name, and the boy then addressed her as Miss Wolves. The woman began to mock, saying that the boy had been seen making shady deals recently and asked if he wasn't ashamed of it. Logan responded with a smile, saying that, as she knew, he had always been a little greedy, and that was none of her business. Still acting spoiled, Rena retorted that she had paid the young man a lot, but the fact that he was still humiliating himself like that meant he must be in desperate need. McLean responded that it was true and then excused himself, immediately beginning to leave. However, the woman commented that she had heard a rumor recently. The rumor said that he had been significantly impactful in a territorial battle with a unique weapon. With a seductive expression, she then asked if the boy didn't want to sell them. Feigning ignorance, our protagonist replied that it wasn't such a unique item and preferred to avoid the embarrassment. After saying this, the boy ran off, leaving Rena irritated by his behavior. Far from there, Logan thought that even though he had become famous for selling the Impo Rick in the capital, not even a noble had shown interest in the territorial battles at the border. Still, the wolf's house was the first to show interest. He noted that the crossbow's design was simple and easy to replicate, so he only had to wait to use them a few more times. The fifth circle mage arrived, calling Logan's name and asking why the boy was there since the meeting place was supposed to be at the western gate. McLean replied that he had just bumped into someone inconvenient, and then immediately said they should leave. Without delay, several carriages set off toward the McLean territory. Inside, a silence settled between Clayton and Logan. Clayton thought to himself that there were 3 spacious carriages that could accommodate at least 6 people each, and just with that, Logan must have spent a lot of money. He commented to the Lord that there was no need for the young man to go so far since the boy had spent money unnecessarily. Seeing this situation, Logan could only think that mages were always proud, and that was no surprise. He responded that to hosts such esteemed mages, this was the least he could do while thinking he should avoid any conflict. Even after hearing that, the mage remained silent and said nothing more. By nightfall, Logan decided that they should rest as it was late, and they would stop there. Around a campfire, distant from the others, the boy was meditating to strengthen his power. Someone with ill intentions appeared behind our protagonist and threw a knife, but the boy easily dodged it. He questioned who did it, and it became clear there were 2 assassins there. One of these mysterious figures said that for someone who dodged that attack, Logan was quite talented for a young lord. A bald man who looked like a criminal commented that he had heard about everything Clayton had done in the capital, especially about the boy's sales. Seeing the group of people there, the Lord assumed they were probably thieves. He replied that he was just trying to relax and review what he had learned the last time. But it was fine since he had been interrupted, he would take action. Immediately after, he drew his sword while commenting that at least he would get to practice with some punching bags. One of the bandits started to get angry with the boy, but before he could say anything, his throat was cut. The other bandits wondered how the boy had reached their ally so quickly. One of the hooded criminals charged at Logan, who quickly prepared to counter. The enemy tried to stab the Lord in the stomach. However, it was the hooded figure who ended up getting slashed in the abdomen, suffering enormous damage to his insides. With the impact of the blow, the hooded man was thrown far away, being instantly eliminated. The remaining 3 survivors just looked at their fallen ally on the ground defeated. A silence echoed all around, and the bandits seemed extremely intimidated. Another criminal with brown hair warned his allies that this was madness and that they needed to retreat. However, before he could do anything, he realized his legs couldn't move, and his entire body was paralyzed. Our protagonist was imitating the same stance that Felix had used against him. Then the boy began to focus his aura into his sword, and the entire blade was surrounded by a glow. He repeated the exact same movements of Esperanza's gravity blade. All the bandits who couldn't escape were quickly struck and cut by the attack. Only one managed to survive, crying while Logan thought that he couldn't sustain that attack for long. But he was extremely happy to have finally managed to copy that technique. Looking at his sword, he commented that the concentrated and compressed force into a new power was known as aura. On that day, the sword technique demonstrated was the weakening of aura, the aura blade, and he never thought you would be able to imitate it at his level. It was incredible that he could use the force blade even if only temporarily. He then looked to the side and realized there was still one survivor from the group of enemies. Logan began to use the sword's impulse to disperse the opponent's force and energy through the oppressive sword. The remaining bandit fell to the ground, and just as Logan was about to stab him, he thought that this technique could be very useful in real combat situations. The criminal, seeing his death approaching, screamed in despair. Right after the massacre, our protagonist stood before the forest thinking that perhaps he had gone too far. However, someone appeared behind him, stating that they had seen everything. That person was Clayton, who had been observing the Lord from afar. The man appeared to be extremely irritated, and Logan, upon seeing him, was surprised. Our protagonist, seeing the 5th-class mage, was confused, wondering why the man was so angry. He'd assumed the man thought he had gone too far, even if those were just thieves. Logan thought that if Clayton said he could no longer work because of this, he would have problems. But to Logan's surprise, Clayton affirmed that the Lord had incredible abilities. The boy was confused, but Clayton said that he didn't know much about Force users, yet after seeing Logan's talent, he realized the boy was promising. Relieved, McLean asked the man not to flatter him too much, while in his head, he thought that the man wasn't angry. It was just his way of expressing himself. The two walked in silence through the forest to return to the carriage. Logan could only think that he had deliberately gone far enough from the camp to avoid exposing himself to anyone who wasn't an ally, and yet Clayton had gone all the way there just to find him, which made Logan wonder why the man did that. Then the bearded man opened his mouth and commented that his disciples were struggling because they hadn't had a good teacher, so he wanted to at least teach them something. Logan replied that the bearded man seemed to already be doing a great job, so he questioned why the man felt the need to mention that. Clayton explained that when they started working, he wanted a break to be able to teach his students. The man also said that he himself would work harder than anyone else, so he asked if Logan could be understanding about that, and the redhead agreed. something strange started happening and our protagonist noticed that mana was flowing from Clayton to a certain location. He saw that this location was the tent where the mages were sleeping. Seeing this, Lovin was quite impressed, as he wondered why the mage was going so far as to give his mana to his disciples. The young man then commented that it seemed the bearded man cared a lot for his apprentices. Hearing this, the man said that he was a teacher and had to do at least the minimum for them. McLean even recalled that the man had gone far enough to fight with the tower master for the sake of his disciples, but the man denied this, citing that it had been the elder. Finally, after a long journey, they arrived at Lovin's family territory. Inside the mansion, the boy was speaking with his father, Patrick, and the man asked if the boy had gained a lot of experience in the capital. He responded that the trip had been very useful and his father was pleased, asking if there was anything else the boy wanted to report. The young man then decided to be upfront and told his father that the business in the capital was going well and soon they would start generating profit. Patrick was confused because he didn't know what kind of business his son was running, and the boy responded that he had started a business with the same medicine he had given him. The patriarch, realizing what was going on, asked if the boy was saying that he had gone to the capital to sell those adult medicines. Disappointed, the man commented that he knew he had told his son that he wouldn't interfere in his affairs, but he wanted his son to at least consider the reputation and dignity of their family next time. Logan agreed and thought that his father was handling it better than he had expected. He also mentioned that he had met the Sword Duke and had formed a great connection with him, and upon hearing this, Patrick asked if he was talking about Felix. The lord of the estate asked if his son had sold the medicine to that person, and the boy replied that he had. Patrick became completely irritated, but the boy explained that he had received a secret intermediate sword technique in exchange for the medicines. Looking at that book, Patrick was impressed, and his son informed him that it was a full-fledged intermediate sword skill guaranteed by the Sword Duke. In his thoughts, the young man revealed that it was a lie and that he had written the book during the days he spent at the Sword Duke's mansion. The Empire merchant had found the iron catch-up sword while excavating some ruins, and it was one of the high-ranked sword technique books. At first, the merchant copied the book and sold it to only a few, but the entire copy began circulating in the market and later spread widely. However, that situation wouldn't happen for at least another 10 years, so having his family's knights learn it now would greatly help in advancing their forces. He also mentioned that if they added the sword's key and even the secret of the divine sword, his father and Ronian could use these as their trump cards. However, the young man thought to himself that this technique pushed force to the extreme, potentially causing internal damage during training, and his father would never allow that. That's why using the Sword Duke's name in this situation would definitely make him accept it. As Patrick read the book, he thought it was on a completely different level from the family's records and far superior in quality. He also commented that the reality was that it's difficult for nobles to gain intermediate sword techniques, which was why he hadn't been able to progress for 10 years. Patrick told his son that if they maximize it correctly, it would increase the overall strength of their knight order by at least 30%. Logan then said that was great, and in addition, he had a proposal. But his father immediately interrupted him, saying that he should maximize the technique properly to repay the Duke. The young man tried to stop him, but Patrick remained determined. Instead, they didn't have time for that. He also mentioned that maximizing it was his priority, so he would leave things to Logan for a while. The boy was handed a stamp and realized it was the seal of the McLean family. As Patrick walked away, he asked his son to help Dwayne with family matters in the meantime, as he would return after perfecting the skill. The boy tried to stop his father, but the man left so quickly that he couldn't even say a word. Staring at the seal, he realized that it meant he didn't need his father's permission for anything. And that was perfect because he would have everything ready before Patrick finished his training. However, Dwayne suddenly entered the room, stating that he had heard about the young master's achievements in the capital. The blonde man asked the boy to help the family with some money, and Logan asked if they had received funds from the battle. Dwayne explained that the money wasn't enough to maintain both fortresses, since the battle had caused a reduction in the workforce, and even Kairos had cut off all aid. The short man continued begging Logan to give some money since the boy had made a fortune. Logan, while smiling, apologized, saying that he had already spent it all. Shocked, the short man said he knew Logan had earned millions, so he asked how he had spent it all so quickly. McLean just remained silent, and Dwayne said that it wasn't funny anymore. The two continued staring at each other without saying a word, and Dwayne understood everything. The man asked if Logan was serious, and the redhead confirmed that he was. Once again, Dwayne asked where on earth the boy had spent it all, and the boy began to explain where he had invested his money. Dwayne didn't quite understand since Logan had spent money on magical scrolls, building materials, and food. The financial manager tried to argue that buying a bit of food for the people wouldn't change anything, but Logan interrupted him, stating that he was going to spend $1 million in gold. He repeated that he would distribute $1 million's worth of food every month for a year to the people. Dwayne became frantic, asking if the boy had eaten something spoiled, while Logan thought to himself that he had expected that reaction. The redhead explained that he was in perfect health and that it would be enough to feed the people, and Dwayne agreed, but asked what the building materials were for. He asked if the boy was planning to start construction, and the young man explained that they were going to build a dam. 2 weeks later, a poster could be seen on the wall stating that Logan was calling everyone to regulated work, whether from Tessern or McLean. At the Tessern fortress, people were extremely angry since the nobles were exploiting them to the maximum. At the McLean fortress, it was no different, as regulated work in the middle of harvest season was terrible, and they would starve. One of them commented that the Lord was telling them to shrink and starve to death. Another remarked that all the nobles wanted them to die in the end. Now that it had come to this, the civilians began gathering, and after raising their farming equipment, they prepared to attack the feudal lord. In front of the McLean estate, several civilians had gathered. One of them asked an old man if they were really going to do this, and the old man said the nobles had been mistreating the civilians for too long. The old man also said that with all those people, it was worth picking a fight this time. The young man who had been hesitant swallowed hard, agreeing that the old man was right, and that this was the best chance they had. With authority, he remarked that they were going to drag all those nobles down. Finally, the castle doors opened, and all the peasants prepared for the attack. Inside, an army of knights was getting ready. Suddenly, one of the knights ordered his subordinates to prepare for distribution, and several carriages started moving towards the civilians. The peasants, who had been furious, began to wonder what was happening and were confused by the situation. The old man insisted that they wouldn't distribute anything, calling it nonsense and saying that those damn nobles were just trying to manipulate them. Suddenly, one of the knights brought a sack towards the old man. He stated that by order of Lord Logan, those who participated in the compulsory labor would receive a full month's worth of grains for their family. The knight also affirmed that they would start distributing it and that everyone should form a line in an orderly fashion. The people who had been furious before now started celebrating, realizing they wouldn't have to go hungry anymore. With that, the old man who had been so angry now bitterly regretted his actions. The elder began to cry while shouting blessings for Logan McLean's long life. He shouted even louder, and all his former allies who had been enraged heard him. Thus, all the civilians began chanting for Logan, and Dwayne saw it all. The short man questioned his lord if it was really necessary to enforce compulsory work to gather them there. Logan heard this and responded that if he hadn't done that, not even a quarter of them would have shown up. After all, they don't trust nobles. The boy thought that nobles typically view their people as property, and any noble with a conscience would see it as their duty to protect their people. But having lived as a mercenary and a commoner in his past life taught him that, to the common folk, the only difference between good and bad nobles was who took more or less from them. The young man then mentioned that even his father thought more about the knights than the people, believing that the knights were the strength of a nation. That's why, despite the budget shortfall, Patrick still maintained a horde of 50 knights. Logan then concluded that's why he forced the civilians to gather here, so they could see and believe for themselves. The redhead then asked why Dwayne was staring at him, and the man responded that Logan had been surprising him all along. Our protagonist then replied that since Dwayne trusted him and listened, they could now move forward with the construction. However, remembering the dam, the short man once again asked his lord to reconsider, as it didn't make sense to spend $2 million on a project of that scale. Seeing this, Logan remarked that Dwayne was sounding like those two other people. He then recalled the moment when the 5th level mage and Hammer had been extremely confused about him wanting to dig a hole through the mountain. Furthermore, Logan wanted to draw water from the river there and even build a floodgate for it. As the young man ate during the meeting with his 2 servants, he confidently stated that it was entirely possible. McLean also mentioned that his family's territory was surrounded by dense mountains and barren lands on all sides, meaning it was a poor land. But even those relatively low mountains to the north were blocking the flow of the Leather River from heading south. That's why they were going to create a large hole in those wild mountains to the north to bring the river's water through it. Halmar said it would be more convincing to say they were going to tear down the entire mountain, but Logan simply asked the dwarf to listen. The redhead declared that they were going to build a tunnel directly connected to the Leather River with a diameter of 30 meters at ground level, which would serve as a floodgate. In his head, he thought that, in reality, this was a flow control method that would become popular in the Empire in 20 years. The boy also commented to himself that he didn't know the principles of construction, but since they had a master-level dwarf and a 5th level mage, and if those two could successfully complete the construction, they could turn the desolate lands in the west of McLean into arable plains. Upon hearing this, the mage was about to complain, but Hammer said they needed to carefully choose the location. The dwarf explained that the condition of the soil was important, and they should consider the water levels and channels to prevent the tunnel from collapsing. Clayton whispered in Hammer's ear, asking the dwarf if it was really possible, but the short man realized he had spoken out loud. With an extremely malicious and intimidating expression, the protagonist asks if it was really possible. Hammer responds that he was already worried about other projects at the moment and couldn't do it, but Logan says that's why they had prepared magical scrolls. Approaching his vassal, Logan says he will leave the responsibility of finding the right mountain to the dwarf, but the elder becomes extremely irritated. Meanwhile, the 5th level mage, just observing the whole situation, wonders if everything is really okay. We return to the present moment, and near a mountain, Clayton is releasing all his power. The others around him question if what they're seeing is magic because it's so impressive. Halmar then tells the mage that if he's ready, they should start now. The man agrees and immediately raises his hand toward the mountain. Upon touching it, a massive explosion hits the structure, causing several rocks to fly through the air. The civilians who were helping start running in panic as rocks fly toward them. Logan remains standing, watching everything, while Hammer hides behind his lord's leg. When the chaos ends, the dwarf scolds the mage, reminding him that he had told him to go easy. And while watching this, Logan says to himself that, aside from strength, the other power that humans can possess is mana, and unlike in his previous life, he could now see it. He could see the power of the earth originating from the mana circle in Clayton's heart, repeatedly drawing complex yet consistent patterns and stimulating the wall. Smiling, Clayton couldn't believe he could see this, as his force core had developed his senses in a transcendent way. The mage then asked his young master to be careful and immediately affirmed that it wasn't over yet. This time, he made another motion with his hand, and Logan realized that the man was performing another spell. After preparing a little, he clenched his fists and several rocks began to gather. All the debris that had fallen started to merge together. Then they began to form a peculiar structure. After a while, Logan finally understood what was happening. Looking ahead, the boy saw an enormous stone golem forming right in front of his eyes. Amazed, he couldn't believe that Clayton could create a golem of that size without any tools. The young man also thought to himself that if they could make a few more golems of that type, not only would the construction finish much faster than planned, but it could also extend into warfare. And thinking about this, the boy gulped. He grabbed Clayton's hand suddenly, catching his attention. With a malevolent expression, the boy asked how many golems the man could make. Impressed, he also asked if Clayton's students could make golems too. The man replied that they could, since they were from the golem school of the Earth Magic Tower. Logan was extremely happy, but Clayton interrupted his excitement, stating there was a problem. The mage explained that the spell formula for creating a human golem core was only possible with a 5th cycle, meaning his disciples would need mana stones. Hearing this, Logan became extremely confused and disappointed. The narrator explains that a mana stone is as rare a mineral as orichalcum or mithril, imbued with a natural energy of mana, making it a valuable resource. It cannot be artificially created and is primarily used for magical assistance or artifact creation, also being quite expensive. Logan thought that even though it wasn't ideal for warfare, it could still be important, so he asked if Clayton's golem would become stronger with mana stones. The man responded affirmatively, saying that the monster's strength and speed would increase, and it would also last much longer. However, as a 5th cycle mage, he would need higher grade mana stones for that. Clayton also added that even for a 2nd cycle golem spell, a low grade mana stone would be sufficient, and the golem could last for at least 24 hours. McLean thought to himself that a low-grade mana stone cost about 1 gold coin, and its cost-effectiveness was very low for such an amount of money. But for a small-scale war, such as one between fiefs, it could easily yield good results. Our protagonists analyze the information and continue looking at Clayton. After some time, we see Dwayne and a few workers, horrified, as they observe a monster. It became clear that this monster was the golem, which was striking the mountain. Dwayne remained scared, and Logan explained that the golem wasn't destroying anything, but simply digging a tunnel. The short man wasn't satisfied with that explanation and stated that he would have to report everything that happened to the patriarch. McLean sighed and asked Hamar to take all the workers to the water channel since there was no need for anyone at the tunnel construction. The dwarf complied, and Logan began to think about the 3 ongoing constructions. The first was the dam tunnel, one of the most important projects. The second was the water channel, which would distribute river water to every piece of the isolated lands. And the third and most crucial was the mine. He recalled receiving the excavation results for the mine while he was in Gran and sending workers there. Logan also reflected that since returning from the capital, he had been too busy with the dam construction and hadn't had the chance to check on the mine. The next day, a scene showed some workers entering and leaving the mine. Hamar was also there, and Logan was confused since he had seen the dwarf at the dam just the day before. The man accused Logan of being the reason he had to keep running back and forth between the mine and the water channel constantly. Hamar then threw his towel down, complaining that he couldn't do it anymore and just wanted to die already. The dwarf continued whining, saying he needed a break, and kept arguing with Logan about having to put up with everything. With a gentle look, Logan placed his hand on Hamar's shoulder and told him he understood. He said the dwarf had already done a great job, and that's why, from that day forward, Hamar would manage and take care of everything on his own. With a malicious expression, the boy also added that Hamar could use the time to prepare a progress report, which only made the dwarf even more irritated. Hamar accused Logan of trying to dump all the responsibilities on him, and the young man realized he had been found out. Raising his pinky finger, the Lord swore he was serious and promised that when the construction was done, he would let the dwarf rest as much as he needed. Frightened, Hamar said he wouldn't agree to that and begged Logan to stay away from him. However, using all his strength, Logan forced the dwarf to make a pinky promise. As he walked away confidently, our protagonist remarked that his subordinate had been acting a bit too cheeky. Looking at the mine, he thought that it would be developed faster than in his previous life, and even with the dam delaying things, it would all work out. It had to. During a conversation with Philip, the boy reported that the construction materials would be delivered without any problems. He also mentioned that they had reached an easy agreement with the lumberjack, negotiating for 100,000 gold coins per month, and Logan thanked him. Finally, Claude mentioned that once they built the mine and cleared the land, the territory would be completely transformed, so Logan should visit the site. Logan agreed, saying his subordinate should go there next year, but Claude was confused, wanting to know why he would only visit McLean a year later. McLean then changed his expression, becoming serious, and stated that there was a rumor about a problem with the royal family. Philip tried to understand the problem, and Logan responded that he had heard it while at the Sword Duke's estate, but didn't know the details. He asked his vassal to investigate those rumors further while conducting business. In his mind, the boy recalled that, according to his memories from his past life, the king would die suddenly next winter and a civil war would break out. But the information he had heard had come from a low-ranking mercenary, so it might not be entirely accurate. After all, if the king's death was truly sudden, even if it happened like in his past life, the timing could end up changing. Logan also commented that just like with the wars between fiefs, the timing of the civil war could shift for an unknown reason, allowing them to prepare. Finally, the young man declared that in the war, a McLean family would turn the kingdom upside down. After that, Logan told Philip to set aside the emergency budget and buy as many weapons and armor as possible, enough to arm about 1,500 men. Claude was confused, saying that he thought the McLean family had fewer than 100 knights, and upon hearing this, Logan replied that the weapons weren't for them. He explained that they were for the soldiers, and Claude, upon hearing this, asked if Logan had lost his mind. The young man commented that no one fully arms all common soldiers during a war, and Logan thought to himself that it might indeed seem strange. Since many people in his territory had died in the last war, because of that, the expected strength of his territory had been drastically reduced. That's why they needed to minimize compulsory recruitment and maximize the strength of their knights and regular soldiers by arming the most vulnerable soldiers as part of the plan. Logan asked his subordinate if he had ever done anything wrong before, and though reluctant, the boy responded that he hadn't. Finally, with a malicious expression, our protagonist declares that they are going to do it, and Philip agrees, saying that he will find out more about those rumors directly. Meanwhile, Logan reflects in his mind that he had to secure funds through the mine, ensure food supplies, and improve the soldiers' weaponry. Thus, the basic preparations for a major advance were progressing smoothly. After a moment, Logan was seen surrounded by a pile of papers, and Dwayne explained that he had to read and sign all those documents. Logan began signing the papers without looking at anything, only to receive a scolding from the financial manager. Dwayne suddenly remembered something and remarked that it had almost been a month. He asked if Logan thought the work of a lord would be over in a day or two, and the boy replied that he had never seen his father work so hard like this. The short man responded that it was obvious since he handled most of the affairs. Logan got irritated and asked why his subordinate had dumped everything on him, and the man replied that as the successor, he needed to understand the duties of the territory. Logan retorted that he wasn't the successor, and Dwayne asked if he thought anyone agreed with that. Suddenly, Kexalon entered the room, announcing that there was an urgent problem. He delivered the unfortunate news that Halmer had been trapped in a collapsed mine. Our video ends here. Subscribe for the continuation, and we'll see you next time.